Welcome back. Some events are so unlikely, they feel like the universe is playing a trick. Imagine the birthday paradox, where a crowded room almost guarantees two people share the same date. Or the Lincoln and Kennedy connection, where eerie similarities stretched across a century. These aren't just random curiosities, they're reminders of how strange and unpredictable the world can be. Tonight we'll explore many more of them. So get comfortable, because this is going to be a long one. Freeze a room mid-conversation and you can almost hear it. The soft click of a coincidence lining up. You do not need a stadium for this. In a group barely bigger than a classroom, the odds are already tilting toward a match. With only 23 people, the chance that two share a birthday is better than a coin flip. That sounds impossible, because we picture one special date trying to find its twin. But the trick is not one date against the world, it is every date against every other. Think about handshakes. In a room of 23 people, there are 253 possible pairs of hands that could meet. Each pair is a chance for a birthday match. You are not betting on just you and someone else. You are betting on all of those pairs at once. As the group grows, those chances stack up quickly. The miracle is not that a match appears. The miracle is that we keep being surprised when it does. Another way to feel it is to imagine guarding against a match. The first person can pick any day. The second just has to avoid that one day. The third has to avoid 2 days, then 3, then 4. Each new person squeezes the safe space a little tighter. By the time you reach person 23, the chance that everyone is unique has slipped under one half. Flip that around, and a match is more likely than not. No heavy math is required to sense the room closing in. Our brains resist this because we anchor on ourselves. We think, what are the chances someone shares my birthday? That is a very different question. The chance that anyone shares your date in a small group is still small. But the moment you say any two people can match, you open the floodgates. It is like focusing on one lottery ticket when the drawing is really about thousands of tickets bumping into each other. Try it where people gather. A classroom, an office, a trivia night. Ignore the year and leap day and let the birthdays roll. With about 30 people, the odds are around 70%. With about 70 people, it is almost certain, about 99%. It even works if birthdays are not perfectly spread across the calendar, because the avalanche of pairs overwhelms small seasonal bumps. And this is why so many coincidences feel impossible. The world gives us countless pairs, trios, and overlaps at every moment. The license plate that mirrors your initials. The same song popping up twice in one afternoon. The friend of a friend who knows your cousin. Each one feels like a wink from the universe, when often it is the mathematics of many chances quietly doing what it does best. So the next time the room hums with chatter, pause and listen for that click. Somewhere in the crowd, two strangers share a cake day. It was not magic. It was inevitability dressed as surprise. Picture the universe leaning over your shoulder and quietly hitting copy and paste on your life. That's how it feels when someone scratches a ticket, screams, and then, against everything you think you know, does it again. You can see it. Fluorescent convenience store lights, a heartbeat loud enough to rattle the gum rack, the clerk double-checking the numbers with a shaky grin. One win is the wildest detour a day can take. A second win drains all the colour from the world and then floods it back brighter. People drop the coins they used to scratch the ticket, the way you drop a pen after signing something life-changing. And afterward, there's an almost superstitious choreography. They put the ticket in a glove box or the freezer or under a family photo, as if proximity to memory could keep the luck from evaporating. It feels impossible because our minds are built for stories, not statistics. We carry around a little backyard calculator in our heads, and it tells us lightning should not strike twice. But chance is a strangely generous architect. When millions upon millions of tickets are bought, the rarest rooms will get built. That's the law of big crowds. In a whole country humming with coffee breaks, stressed paydays, and hopeful little rituals, someone is bound to stumble into a narrow doorway that most of us will only ever walk past. Think about flipping a coin. If you flip it a handful of times and get 5 heads in a row, you call your friend because it feels enchanted. If every person in a packed stadium flips a coin at the same time, someone in the nosebleeds will hit a long streak and they'll be the only person you hear about. That's what happens with those second lottery wins. A retired teacher who once bought tickets the way other people buy postcards suddenly lives in a story that sounds like a myth. A truck driver, breaking a week of bad luck with a scratch-off, returns the next month for milk and walks out with another avalanche of confetti. And yet, beyond the math, there's the human part that keeps us stuck to these tales. People bring their late father's lucky numbers to the counter. They use the same clerk, the same routine, the same corner of the store where the linoleum squeaks. After the first win, they hesitate to play again, then toss a few more dollars at possibility, and fate, or noise, or both, answers. They blush on local news and say they'll buy a porch for their mother, and the town cheers because we want luck to feel contagious. Does it mean the universe is winking? Maybe it just means the universe is large. When you think about all the tickets, all the dates, all the numbers, it gets easier to accept that incredibly rare does not equal never. And still, the goosebumps arrive. Because there is something irresistible about the idea that a second, uninvited miracle can find the same mailbox. So when you hear the phrase "won twice," let your inner mathematician and your inner storyteller hold hands. The first will remind you that big worlds breed strange patterns. The second will lean into the wonder. Together, they'll agree on this one truth. Impossible is just the name we give to what we haven't seen happen yet. Right before someone walks in with 2 winning stubs and a look on their face like fate remembered their address. You hear your name called, but a stranger answers before you do. The sound is correct. The syllables are yours, yet it belongs to someone else. For a beat, your brain's wires cross. Who am I if I'm not the only one? It starts with something simple. A barista sets a cup down and calls your name. You step forward, and so does another person, both of you pausing mid-reach like mirror images learning a new dance. Then you both laugh, that awkward, relieved laugh people make when the universe pulls a small prank. The cup is not the magic. It's the little jolt of being multiplied. The weird part isn't the coincidence itself. Statistically, names repeat. The weird part is how it feels. All the private memories tied to these letters suddenly sit across from you, blinking back as if they could claim your past. Your report cards, your first heartbreak, your favourite song on loop during a late-night walk. Does any of that feel less yours now that it could fit under the same label? The conversation begins the way these things do. You compare spellings like you are comparing fingerprints. You exchange a joke about calling your parents and confusing them. Maybe you share a photo or two, just to anchor the moment in pixels, because if a glitch happens and you don't post about it, did it happen at all? Once you know there's another you in the world, you start spotting echoes. A forwarded email that was meant for them lands in your inbox, and for a second you get a glimpse into their errands, their dentist appointments, their friends' casual tone. A package addressed to your name shows up at your door with the wrong apartment number, and you stand in the hallway holding it like a borrowed life. You search your name and see articles, awards, maybe a traffic ticket that is not your traffic ticket. The edges blur. You imagine your name wearing a new body, walking a different city, ordering a different favourite meal. It is strangely intimate, like glimpsing a parallel path you might have taken if one decision tilted another way. Then comes the tiny identity check inside your chest. What makes you you if your name is not unique? It is a quiet question with a warm answer. Your name is a hook. The story is what you hang on it. No one else had your first day at a job when you pretended to know where the bathroom was and got lost. No one else had your exact joke that flopped and still makes you smile. No one else felt the relief you felt when someone forgave you that one time you finally apologized. Soon, the moment passes. You wave, promise to stay in touch, maybe never do. But walking away, you carry a small, bright feeling. The world is crowded with patterns, and somehow they made room for this playful overlap. You are not the only bearer of your name, but the life attached to it still fits like a custom suit. And the next time your name rings out in a busy room, you will pause for a heartbeat, not to claim the sound, but to listen for the echo, and smile at the thought that somewhere the echo smiles back. I found it where it could never be. The little silver ring slipped off my finger on a rain-slick morning, somewhere between the corner deli and the mouth of the subway. I heard the tiniest clink, a delicate sound swallowed by traffic and umbrellas, and then it was gone. It was my grandmother's ring, the one she wore while humming over the sink, the one that clicked against the side of her teacup. I stood there, soaked, staring at a steel grate as if I could will metal to give me back metal. People nudged by. A bus groaned. I checked pockets I had already checked, turned my bag inside out, and even crouched at the curb to peer between the bars. A stranger held an umbrella over us and said, "You will find it, like a blessing and a lie." I retraced my steps. I asked the deli. I called the station. I did the thing where you promise the universe you'll be better at everything if only you get this one small miracle. For a week I was careful, kind and superstitious. No ring. Life kept moving as it does. I worked, slept, and stopped reaching for my finger every 5 minutes. On a quiet Sunday, I wandered a flea market under a highway, where the light fell in patchy rectangles. There were books with broken spines, faded postcards, bowls that remembered other tables. I bought an old wooden picture frame with curved edges like river stones. It felt nice in the hands, and I thought it would look right on my desk. Back home, I slid the backing loose. Something inside rattled, the way a breath might dim a candle and then steady it again. I tapped the frame on my palm, and a thin strand of yellowed thread fell out. I smiled, thinking of some long-ago person who had tucked a ticket or a flower in there. I lifted the cardboard, and my breath stopped. Nestled in the shallow groove between glass and wood was a silver ring with exactly the kind of small crescent scratch I knew by heart. I sat very still. The room hummed with the refrigerator's low voice, the window fan clicking every spin. The ring was not just similar, it was the same. The slight bend that made it catch on my knuckle. The dotted line of dings from the time it met the edge of a cast iron pan. I turned it over and over, waiting for the trick to show itself. I went back to the market the next weekend, holding the frame like proof. The seller shrugged and said the frame came from a storage unit near the train yard, part of a mixed lot. He laughed and told me I must be lucky. Maybe a ring fell into it at some point, he said, but frames do not stroll around the city swallowing jewellery, and streets do not spit up what they swallow. So I slid the ring back on my finger. It warmed, as if recognising home. I like to imagine the missing days it had, the odd journey of it, the way our things carry secret maps. I do not know how it travelled from a rainy curb to the hollow of that frame. I only know the feeling of holding something impossible and how, for a moment, the world felt stitched together by an invisible thread that tugged me gently back to wonder. A phone buzzes, a silence drops, and suddenly the whole day feels bent out of shape. One famous name is gone. Minutes later, someone says the line we all know too well. That makes 2 more to go. It is eerie how often we feel like that prophecy keeps itself. By the end of the week, we are shaking our heads, insisting the rule of 3 found us again. Here is a strange truth hiding behind the chill. Our minds are pattern machines. We remember stories that come in 3s because they land like a drum beat. Jokes do it. Fairy tales do it. So when the news hits with 1 loss, we start listening for the rhythm. 2 makes a pattern, and 3 makes a story that feels complete. Anything beyond that gets quietly trimmed, and anything that does not fit gets ignored. There is also the way news travels. One major obituary pulls other stories into orbit. Editors assemble pieces that echo each other. Algorithms notice a spike and serve more of the same. Suddenly our feeds look like a corridor lined with black ribbons. If 2 well-known figures pass within a short window, the third name does not need to be equally famous to complete the set. The threshold drops because our expectation rises. The category stretches. A legend, a beloved character actor, a local icon. That is 3. Story complete. Notice how elastic the window is. Sometimes people count 3 within a day. Sometimes a week. Sometimes, if the second does not arrive fast enough, the clock politely keeps running until someone can say there it is, the 3rd. We are not being dishonest. We are doing what the brain does best, stitching sense into chaos. But the stitching is flexible in a way that randomness loves. Randomness clusters. Flip a coin enough times and you will get streaks. And streaks feel like patterns, even when nothing but chance is at work. Generations add another layer. Many celebrities rise to fame around the same era. They age together. If they reach their later years, it is not surprising that several pass away in a similar season. The timing stacks, and we feel the weight of it. It does not lessen the sadness. It just means the math behind the emotions is not haunted, even if it feels that way at 3 a.m. reading another headline. There is comfort in the story of 3s. It shrinks the infinite into something we can hold. It says this is not endless loss. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But comfort can also trick us. When we look closer, we see how we nudge the counts, shift the dates, and expand the category to make the tale ring true. Sometimes we forget the times when one famous person passes and nobody else does for a while, because a single note does not stick the way a chord does. So when the next alert arrives, take a breath. Notice the urge to listen for a second and a third. It is a human instinct, not a prophecy. We can honour each life without auditioning them for a pattern, and still keep that hush of wonder about the ways our minds make meaning from the noise. Picture 2 portraits on opposite walls, and as you step between them, the faces seem to turn and look at each other. Abraham Lincoln on one side, John Fitzgerald Kennedy on the other. Different centuries, different crises, and yet the echoes between them feel like the creak of the same old floorboards. Lincoln walked into Congress in the year 1846. Kennedy did the same in 1946. Lincoln rose to the presidency in 1860. Kennedy in 1960. Both carried a nation on their shoulders in seasons of fierce division, and both spoke in a cadence that could steady a room. When they were struck down, each was seated beside his wife, each on a Friday, each by a bullet that shattered hope and skull in one terrible instant. There is the strange dance of the name Ford. Lincoln fell at Ford's Theatre. Kennedy rode through Dallas in a Lincoln made by Ford. The word loops back on itself, like history enjoying a private joke no one asked to hear. And when the dust cleared, both were followed by men named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, born in 1808, took the oath after Lincoln. Lyndon Johnson, born in 1908, took it after Kennedy. The symmetry lands with a thud you can feel in your chest. The assassins' names make people lean in. John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald. 3 names each, 15 letters each, remembered like grim nursery rhymes. Booth, a performer who believed the stage was his destiny, fled into the night and never stood trial. Oswald, a drifter of tangled loyalties, was silenced before a court could untangle anything. 2 endings without verdicts. 2 shadows that never get smaller no matter how much light you shine. Popular lists will tell you Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, and Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. The second half is true. Evelyn Lincoln guarded the president's schedule like a gate. The first half is a legend that refuses to retire. History, it turns out, is not only what happened, but what we cannot stop repeating to ourselves because it sounds like it should have happened. That is how coincidences tighten their grip. There is another oft-whispered mirror. Lincoln was shot in a theatre, and his killer fled into the everyday world. Kennedy was shot from a workplace, and his accused assassin ran to a theatre. It is not a perfect reflection, more like a warped one, but the mind loves symmetry and will bend facts to see it. We crave patterns because patterns promise meaning. Beyond the law, the parallels that matter most are heavier. Both men spoke of union and equality with a fervour that threatened entrenched power. Both carried the grief of lost children. Both sparked movements that outlived them, as if the bullet only cut the cord on a bell already ringing. Are these alignments a message, a map, or just the clatter of chance? Maybe the truth is simpler and more unsettling. In a country wrestling the same old arguments, leaders who try to pull it toward its better story stand in the same spotlight at the same distance from danger. And when the worst happens, we reach for rhyme, because rhyme is the human way of asking why. The first clue was quiet. A left-handed signature slanting the same way on 2 different forms in 2 different towns. One man writes it without thinking. Across the state, another man signs his in the same looping tilt, pauses, and wonders why it feels like muscle memory borrowed from a stranger. They grow up apart, each with a favourite booth at a diner that smells like coffee and rain. Each orders the same weirdly specific thing: a burger, no pickles, extra onions, and a slice of cheddar folded rather than flat. On a Tuesday, one of them jokes to the waitress, "If the cheese isn't folded, my day isn't either." Somewhere else, the other one laughs at the same line and doesn't know why it lands so easily on his tongue. When they finally meet as adults, they study each other like mirrors with different frames. "Do you sleep with the window cracked?" one asks. "Every night," the other says. "Do you tap your keys twice before you put them away?" "Always." Then they both reach for their pockets in the same beat and, without meaning to, nod in sync. They swap stories and it gets stranger. A childhood dog with the same odd name. First crushes who wore the same perfume, the way they fidget during small talk, twisting the same knuckle as if tuning a radio only they can hear. It would be easy to call it fate. It would be tempting to say the universe drafted a script in ink the day they were born. But there is another way to look at it. Identical twins start with the same blueprint. Yes, but the world builds the walls. Some habits are born in the body, the preference for a certain flavour, a tilt toward a rhythm, the instinct to wake just before dawn. Others are poured by the places they land, the street with the siren at midnight, the teacher who loved quiet, the friend who taught them a joke they both still use because it feels like their own. Psychologically, our minds are drawn to patterns and echoes. When we spot them in lives that began in the same cell, the chorus gets louder and the coincidences feel impossible to ignore. Here's the curious beauty. Even the overlaps reveal something tender about choice. They both became the kind of person who leaves an extra note for a neighbour. They both keep a spare toothbrush under the sink, just in case. One grows tomatoes on a balcony, the other does it on a back porch. The details rhyme, but the verses are still theirs. Do you ever think about how close we came to missing all of this? One says. The other shrugs and smiles. I think we would have found it anyway. Maybe not each other, but these little patterns that feel like home. Maybe that is what coincidences are. Not proof that everything is scripted, but evidence that life is generous with its refrains. They show us how much of us is seeded early and how much is shaped by weather and neighbours, and a song on the radio we did not choose yet cannot stop humming. And when two people share a beginning, those refrains can sync like heartbeat and breath. It looks like magic. It sounds like destiny, but it feels, most of all, like recognition. Like looking across a table and seeing your own laugh coming back to you, folded neatly, just how you like it. Before the ocean claimed a single rivet, a stranger wrote the ending. Years before an iceberg carved its cold signature into history, a mariner-turned-novelist named Morgan Robertson sat down and imagined a ship he called the Titan. He wrote his tale in the late 1890s, long before the world said the name Titanic. His fictional liner was the pinnacle of human pride and engineering, the biggest ship afloat, a palace of steel and light that everyone swore could not sink. And in his story, on an April night in the North Atlantic, the Titan struck an iceberg while racing forward, carrying too few lifeboats for the souls aboard. It sounds like a fortune-teller's trick, but this was a seasoned sailor putting ink to paper. Robertson knew the sea. He knew how shipbuilders were chasing size and speed, how safety laws measured lifeboats by tonnage rather than people, how ice drifts down in spring like a necklace of glass. So he blended those truths and wrote a disaster that felt inevitable. Then, years later, a very real masterpiece of steel slid into the Atlantic, hailed as practically unsinkable, fitted with fewer boats than it needed, and aimed itself through a field of warnings on an April night in 1912. When people learn this, they reach for the exact overlaps, and there are many. The names rhyme like a taunt: Titan and Titanic. Both ships were described as the largest of their kind. Both pushed for speed. Both lacked enough lifeboats to carry everyone. Both met ice in the same ocean at the same time of year. Even small details feel eerie, like the distance from land or the hour so close to midnight. It is tempting to say a story became a spell, but the truth can be stranger and more human. Robertson was not peering through time. He was paying attention. At the turn of the century, newspapers were breathless about record breakers. Shipbuilders were building higher and longer, stacking decks and promising comfort as if comfort were a life vest. The laws lagged behind technology, so lifeboats were an afterthought. Captains were praised for arriving faster, not for slowing down. If you take all of that and you add the North Atlantic's springtime ice, do you really need a crystal ball to imagine what could happen? That does not drain the wonder away. In fact, it puts the wonder in a different place. The coincidence feels impossible because it reminds us how many warnings the world whispers before it shouts. Robertson gathered those whispers and arranged them into a cautionary tale. When the real ship hit the real iceberg, the echoes were deafening, and it became easier to call it prophecy than pattern. Maybe that is why this story refuses to sink. It is at once spooky and practical, a ghost story stitched from facts. A novelist drew a line from hubris to iceberg, and the world later traced it with tragedy. Whether you hear it as omen or observation, it leaves the same chill. When pride promises the ocean will behave, the ocean does not listen. Your fingers pull a forgotten paperback from a shelf, and the dust reads like a warning. Inside is a stormy night, a glittering ocean liner, too few lifeboats, and a collision with an iceberg in April. The ship is called Titan. The year the book was written is 1898. The author, Morgan Robertson, swears he is no prophet. He is just a seaman who knows his trade. Yet, 14 years later, a real liner praised as unsinkable cuts through the North Atlantic in April, with too few lifeboats, and meets an iceberg. Different name, same fate. The mind lurches. How could a made-up disaster line up so cleanly with the real one? There is another chilling echo. Years before that voyage, a journalist named W.T. Stead wrote a story about a shipwreck caused by lifeboat shortages. He argued in fiction that complacency kills. In 1912, he boarded the very ship that would make that argument real. He did not survive. At some point, coincidence starts to feel like choreography. Books and films are not crystal balls, but they are pressure gauges. In the late 19th century, steamships were racing for size and speed. Writers who worked the docks or read the trade papers could see the corners being cut and the pride swelling. A novelist imagines where hubris might lead, and time does the rest. When reality arrives, it looks like a prediction because the story traced the likeliest fracture. The pattern repeats in glowing light. In 1979, a film about a nuclear plant's slow-motion catastrophe premiered, showing how a chain of small failures and human denial could feed a larger crisis. Less than 2 weeks later, alarms sounded at a real plant in Pennsylvania. The world learned a new phrase, partial meltdown. The filmmakers had not conjured the accident. They had listened to engineers, sketched the fault lines, and trusted that probability is patient. Even stranger threads stretch across centuries. Edgar Allan Poe wrote an adventure about shipwrecked sailors who draw lots and eat the cabin boy. He named him Richard Parker. Decades later, after a real shipwreck, the boy who was killed and eaten was also named Richard Parker. The names are the part that haunts, but the larger truth is that when thousands of pages are written and thousands of lives unfold, some threads will knot by chance into eerie shapes. So what are we to do with these alignments that make the hairs on our neck rise? Part of it is how our brains work. We are great at spotting patterns and terrible at counting the ways they could have turned out differently. We remember the hits and forget the near misses. Still, the best so-called predictions share more than coincidence. They notice the weak rivets, the blind spots, the overconfidence. They ask, what happens if we keep doing this? Maybe that is why these stories linger. They are not spells, they are mirrors. When a page seems to foreshadow a headline, it is often because someone looked without flinching at how the world breaks. Coincidence is the spark that gets our attention. The lesson is everything after. Where are we sailing too fast, trusting too much, carrying too few lifeboats of our own? Lightning keeps a list, and somehow some names appear twice. Not because the sky holds a grudge, but because chance can be a show-off, clustering the improbable in the same corner of a life. The first time feels like a story you borrow to tell at gatherings. The second time turns that story into a mirror, asking, what are the odds and why am I still here? Picture a park ranger closing the cabin door as a storm rolls over the pines. She knows the drill now. The first strike taught her to treat clouds like a live wire. She counts the gap between flash and rumble, and when the air tightens into that silent pressure, she goes still, sets down the metal tools and waits it out away from the doorframe. The bolt that arrives is so fast it feels like a skipped heartbeat. She falls, then breathes. Not a miracle, just muscle memory meeting luck, and luck deciding to blink. Or a mail carrier on a long rural route. Years ago, lightning pinned a white scar along his forearm and a mantra inside his head. Car is safe, fields are not. Now, when the sky turns that greenish grey, he sits in the hard-top truck and lets the storm pass. Then one afternoon, a jolt dances across the road and tags the vehicle. He hears it more than he sees it, like the crack of a giant bone. Everything works because his choices were boring and correct and on time. He laughs, shaky, telling himself, not brave, just careful. Psychologically, these near-impossible repeats tug at the part of our mind that searches for patterns even when reality is random. We want the second strike to mean something grand, a message written in light. But what it usually means is this. Rare things can cluster, and once you have met one, you carry a map that helps you survive the next. That is not magic. It is attention, caution, and a nervous system that remembers. This is the kind of story where the spine is simple. Hook, idea, example, insight, and a closing breath that lingers, so the point echoes after the sound fades. There is a flip here worth naming. It is tempting to imagine double strikes as proof that fate points a finger. A more useful reframe is that survival often grows out of tiny habits seeded by the first shock. Learning to check the sky, learning where not to stand, learning that you can move without panicking when every cell wants to sprint. Not destiny, but discipline. Not chosen, but changed. Listen to the quiet moral that slips in behind the spectacle. Even when events feel targeted, they usually are not. And even when chance writes the plot, you still write your reactions. That is the part that keeps you alive the second time. That is the part you get to keep. So when someone says, lightning never strikes twice, nod at the comfort in that sentence, then make room for the truth that sometimes it does. Hold both ideas gently. Respect the odds and respect the outliers who walk out of the smoke twice, a little singed and a lot steadier. In a world that can be reckless, their lives remind us that coincidence can shock you, but attention can steady you. The impossible happens, and somehow people survive it again. A name falls out of a child's mouth, like a key dropped on stone, ringing in a room no one else remembers. There is a hush, a parent's smile that falters, and then the child keeps talking, certain and strange. He knows a street that is hours away. He knows a boat that was painted blue, then white, then blue again. He knows where the garden gate creaks. No one taught him that. No one could have. He has never been to that town. Yet when the family finally goes, he walks ahead, turns left at the little bakery with the cracked window, and points to a house as if he is simply walking home. This is the feeling again and again. A little girl who wakes from a nap, asking for the grandmother she never met, and spelling her name correctly, including the uncommon middle name. A boy who says he used to fix clocks, and then at the antique shop, his hands move like they have muscle memory, like the springs and gears are old friends. A teen who dreams of a storm and a ship's horn and cold, and then draws a coastline so exact that a retired sailor studies it and whispers the name of a place the teen has never heard. Some stories are whispers that drift away, but some come with anchors, hard details that can be checked. A family phone number recited with a sing-song cadence. A farm name, tucked into a rural valley far from any map a toddler could have seen. A scar that sits like a shadow in the exact shape of an injury mentioned in the child's midnight mumbling. Parents write things down. They test their kid gently. They keep it to themselves until a coincidence grows too heavy to be coincidence anymore. They arrive at a door. The child knocks with a confidence that makes everyone catch their breath. The door opens, and the child greets an elderly stranger by a nickname no one uses. Eyes widen, hands tremble. A box emerges from a closet, and inside are little objects the child described without ever seeing them. A broken locket, a marble with a swirl like smoke, a paper star. Skeptics will say the world leaks information, that children overhear, that memory stitches scraps into something that looks like a tapestry. And that may be true often, but what do we do with the moments that survive that test, the spelling that is too exact, the map that lines up, the emotion that surges sudden and raw, as if a story inside them sees daylight for the first time and recognizes it? When you listen closely to these children, the strangest part is not the facts they get right. It is the calm. They speak not like storytellers, but like travellers, describing a road already walked. They are not trying to convince you. They are trying to finish a sentence. So perhaps the world is wider than our calendars. Perhaps memory is like light, able to pass through walls we think are solid. Or perhaps this is all a grand trick of the mind, a deck of cards dealt into perfect order by chance and longing. Either way, the door is open. The name is spoken. The keys are in a small hand, shining. And somewhere, a creaky gate swings, as if someone remembered to come home. Imagine flipping open a novel and finding, page by page, the blueprint of a future headline. Not prophecies in robes, not crystal balls, just ink and paper sketching a reality that hasn't happened yet. On a quiet desk in the late 1800s, a writer named Morgan Robertson dreamed up a leviathan of a ship. He called it the Titan. In his story, it was the largest craft afloat, hailed as practically unsinkable, and it carried too few lifeboats because, after all, what could go wrong? On an icy April night in the North Atlantic, Robertson wrote, "The Titan strikes an iceberg and slides under." Years later, a real ship, the Titanic, would follow the same script with terrifying devotion, a boast of invincibility, an April crossing, a midnight collision, far too few lifeboats, and a cold black sea swallowing the lights. It sounds like a lazy twist, except no one was writing it this time. They were living it. Go back further. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe published a strange sea tale about shipwrecked sailors adrift with no food. To decide who must die so the others may live, they draw lots. The unlucky cabin boy is named Richard Parker. Decades pass. A small yacht, the Mignonette, sinks in the South Atlantic. The survivors are found after weeks at sea, and a grim truth surfaces. They killed and ate their cabin boy. His name was Richard Parker. Poe's page had crawled out of the book and onto the open ocean. A name and a fate lined up like a cruel rhyme. And then there is the man who liked to build tomorrow out of brass and steam. In 1865, Jules Verne mapped a trip to the moon. He set his launch in Florida. He placed 3 men in a metal shell and planned their return as a splashdown at sea to be recovered by a ship. It wasn't perfect science, but listen to the cadence of those details. Florida, 3 travelers, an ocean landing, a waiting vessel. When the real astronauts later rode fire into the sky and fell back in warm waves while sailors hauled them aboard, you could almost hear Verne turning a page and smiling. Where do these echoes come from? Maybe it's that fiction lets us rehearse. A writer arranges the stage and the world, always busy improvising, sometimes stumbles into the same light. Or maybe our minds are tuned to patterns, delighted by the click of a coincidence, quick to underline the pieces that match and let the rest fade. Yet not every echo is soft. The Titan and the Titanic feel like a shout. Poe's Richard Parker is a shock you taste in your mouth. Still, notice what these tales quietly share. Human pride, human peril, human wonder. People build something so grand they think it cannot fail. People drift into choices that stain history. People imagine a frontier, and then they go. So the strangest part may not be that stories come true, but that our lives are always close to stories, close enough that sometimes the line blurs, and paper whispers to the world, and the world incredibly whispers back. The seat remembered before they did. On a rainy afternoon, a stranger shook out an umbrella and asked, "Is this seat taken?" The usher pointed. "Row G, seat 12, right on the aisle." They sat, wiped a raindrop from their sleeve, and watched a play about chance meetings. Years pass. Another Thursday, different clouds, same theatre. Someone else steps in late, mouth forming the same question, and lands in the very same spot. No one notices except the seat, and eventually the 2 people who will realize their stories cross there twice without either of them knowing. That's the pull of it, right? The weird little tug in your chest that says, wait, that can't just be random. Maybe it's a coffee shop stool where you always end up, or a desk you choose at a lecture because it's near a window, and later you find a photo of someone you'll come to love sitting in that exact place years before. It feels like a nudge, a wink, a line being drawn quietly between 2 dots. Funny. I always sit here, one of them murmurs to a friend, half laughing. Later, a different day, the other one traces a date on the back of an old ticket stub and wonders why that specific seat number keeps resurfacing. They don't know it yet, but those 2 sentences rhyme. Psychologically, our brains are pattern hunters. We stitch moments together into stories because stories help us feel safe and see cause and effect, even when life is messy. That's why the mind lights up at a pair of matching details. A seat number, a repeated street corner, a song playing at 2 turning points. It is meaning-making at work. And that's not a flaw, that's a feature. Here's the reframe most of us miss. Coincidences don't have to prove anything to move us. Not fate carved in stone, not a plan we can map. They can simply be invitations to pay closer attention. It's natural to crave a grand answer, but the real gift is smaller and somehow bigger at the same time. The moment says, look again. Who were you when you first sat here? Who are you now? What invisible thread are you tugging without realizing? In the theatre, they finally meet, not because the universe forced it, but because attention did. One drops a pen, the other reaches down, and they laugh at the synchronized, sorry, they compare ticket stubs. You were here that night? No way. Same seat. The coincidence doesn't write their story. It clears a space for them to write it. And when the lights dim, you can feel it. How a tiny overlap can turn strangers into conspirators in the best possible way. If you let them, these impossible-feeling echoes soften the edges of ordinary days. They slow you down. They make you kinder to chance and more open to people. Research often shows that when we feel a sense of connection, even a symbolic one, we behave with more warmth and curiosity, and that curiosity tends to change what happens next. That is the quiet power here. Not certainty, openness. So when life taps you on the shoulder with a familiar seat or a familiar street, don't rush to decode it like a puzzle. Sit with it. Let it make you look up, look around, and say hello a little sooner. Maybe fate is not a map, but a mirror, showing you where your choices and your chances keep meeting. Sometimes the path forward starts exactly where you sat before, the same seat, the second time. There's a whisper in your mind that already knows what happens next. You reach for the door, and before your fingers touch the handle, a picture flashes. The soft rattle of keys, the scrape of metal, the warm breath of air rushing out to meet you. The moment arrives exactly as your memory promised. Your stomach dips. How could you remember a future? It sneaks in during ordinary scenes. A cafe you've never visited, where the light through the window lands on the table in a pattern you recognize. Someone behind you laughs the exact laugh you were sure you'd already heard. The spoon in your hand clinks the cup, and you know with a strange certainty the next sound will be a bus grumbling past and a voice asking for extra sugar. Then it happens, and you sit with that glossy sheen of certainty, the feeling that time folded and you stepped into a crease you've walked before. We call it déjà vu, but the name is just a label placed on a mystery wearing familiar clothes. Some say it's your brain flickering, the way a theatre projector catches and shows one frame twice, giving the story a half-step loop. Others imagine a dream you forgot, a rehearsal performed at night that resurfaces when the set, the lighting, and the cue all line up in daylight. Or maybe it's your pattern-hungry mind leaping ahead like a well-trained dog, guessing the next beat, and then wagging when the rhythm matches. There's a stranger version, the coincidence that makes your neck prickle. You open a dusty book at random, and the line your eyes land on is the phrase your friend texted you minutes ago. You turn a street corner in a city you've never lived in and recognize the chipped blue paint on a door, the smell of sun-warmed lemons from a balcony, the exact path your feet can't wait to take. It feels impossible, but impossibility is often just our word for a pattern we can't yet name. If you could watch yourself from the outside, you might see how much of life is prediction. Your senses collect detail like a diligent librarian, shelving tiny fragments in secret. A reflection in a window, a rhythm of footsteps, the way wind drags a flag across the sky. Later, when the puzzle pieces align, the librarian stamps the page twice by mistake, and now becomes familiar. The warmth in your chest says memory. The clock on the wall says this is happening for the first time, and yet there is a softness to the wonder that refuses to be filed away. Déjà vu feels like the mind smiling at you through the glass, as if to say, yes, you've been here because you are so good at being here that you predicted it down to the breath. It can be comforting, like stepping into a room where your name has already been spoken. So the next time it washes over you, your hand pausing mid-air, your eyes widening at the echo of a scene you somehow know, stay inside it a moment longer. Listen for the bus. Wait for the laugh. Feel the edges of time blur, not because you've slipped backward, but because you've brushed against the moment your mind and the world locked hands. A tiny miracle hiding in a familiar hallway, reminding you that life is both a script and an improvisation. And sometimes, just sometimes, the world forgets which came first. The first time I noticed the mirror, it wasn't made of glass. It was a morning that felt like an echo. I stepped off a curb as someone across from me did the same. Same navy coat, same hurried knot in a scarf. We both did that small, apologetic smile people do in cities. Then her tote bag caught my eye, my hometown in block letters. She noticed my keychain, the name of the tiny cafe she worked at through college. "You too?" she said. "No way," I said. We laughed and kept moving, but the city kept handing us matched edges. I lived on the near side of the river. She lived on the far, both apartments facing water like parentheses. Her dog was named Cedar. My plant, a little tree I'd had for years, was a cedar too. She had a brother named Aaron. My sister is Nora. We had opposite commutes. She walked west in the morning, I walked east. We were each other's shadow, traced on different sidewalks. That was the day I started seeing it everywhere. A barista ends a late shift and leaves a bag of pastries on the counter by mistake. The opener arrives and smiles because those are exactly the pastries she planned to bring for him. A cab driver drops someone at a hospital he hasn't visited since he was born, and the passenger says, "Me too, this is the place." A couple meets because they both took the wrong train in opposite directions, then realized they were headed to the same bookstore for the same out-of-print author, each holding a different edition with the same underlined line. Sometimes lives don't align piece by piece. They rhyme. The details don't match. They reflect. One person loses a job the same week, another person begins theirs. Both learning about worth from opposite sides. You call your mum right as she calls you, and at once you're relieved and spooked, like someone switched on a porch light inside the day. A stranger tells a story that finishes your sentence, but from the other end. Psychologically, our minds are pattern-seeking on purpose. We are always stitching bits together into meaning, and when two threads glint at the same angle, it lights us up. You could call it coincidence, bias, plain chance. But there's also a softer explanation: attention. What we notice starts to notice us back. When you're tuned to mirrors, you catch reflections you'd otherwise miss. And catching them has its own quiet effect. It pauses you. It makes room. The old way is to shrug and move on. The reframe is to treat these moments like small invitations, not proof of destiny, just openings. A chance to say, okay, we are in the same story for a second. Maybe we belong to each other a little more than we admit. Later that week, I ran into the coat and scarf stranger again. We stood at the crosswalk, grinning like we'd discovered a secret shortcut. "Maybe we're living opposite pages of the same book," she said. "Maybe we're on the same page, just reading from different corners," I said. The light changed. We went our mirrored ways. The mirror life coincidence won't hand you answers, but it can make your life feel true in a way that's hard to name. When a detail returns to you like an echo, let it. Let it slow you, warm you, line your day with a thin golden edge. Then keep going, a little more awake, ready for the next reflection. The name arrived before I did. It was written on a faded recipe card, stitched into a baby blanket, carved into the picnic table at the old park. By the time I was born, everyone already knew how to say it, how to stretch it when calling me in for dinner, how to whisper it when I fell asleep in the back seat. That is the quiet magic of names that repeat in families. They do not just label us, they summon a history. Think about a dinner table where someone calls out James and three heads turn. It is funny, a little chaotic and somehow comforting. In that split second, you can see a whole family tree light up like a string of holiday lights. The name is a thread that runs through years and miles and old houses, pulling the past a little closer to the present. There is tradition, of course. A grandfather who worked dawn to dusk, so his children could have more than he did. A grandmother whose laugh filled every corner of the room. When a baby takes their name, it is a tiny ceremony that says, "We will keep this alive." Psychologically, it also gives us a landing place. Familiar things feel safer, and a repeated name is a soft place to stand in a world that keeps moving. But it is not just about honouring the giants on the mantle. Sometimes a name repeats because love needs a shape. A family loses an uncle too soon, and the next child carries him forward with every introduction. It is not replacing a person, it is remembering on purpose. Each time we say the name, the story gets told one more time, and grief has somewhere to live that is not just silence. Here is the surprise, though. When your name repeats, you get a kind of inherited momentum, but you also get a choice. Maybe everyone expects you to be the third Michael who becomes a teacher, or the fourth Rosa who sings in church. Maybe you carry the name and break the pattern. You become the first one to paint murals, or to move across an ocean, or to love a person your family never expected. The name does not lock you in. It gives you a door you can walk through in your own way. And if you do not repeat the name, the echo still finds you. It shows up in the way you stand with your hands on your hips, like your aunt. It's in the joke you tell the same way your dad told it for decades. It is in the recipe you make without measuring, because your grandmother did it by heart. Names are the headline, but the body of the story is written in the little things we keep. So when a name repeats, it is not a trick of fate or a coincidence that got out of hand. It is the family saying, "This mattered, this still matters, and we want to remember." You are not a copy. You are a continuation. A familiar melody with a new verse. And whether you carry the name or hand it to someone new, the most astonishing part is how it changes slightly in your voice. That is how the past stays alive without staying the same. That is how a name keeps repeating and keeps becoming. Maybe the universe keeps spare lives in its pocket, and every so often it slips one to the same person twice. That is how it felt to Lena. She never chased danger. She was ordinary in all the ways that should keep you safe, always early, always buckled, always the person reminding everyone else to hold the railing. The first time, the morning was a wash of fog and ferry horns. Lena stood in the queue behind a man balancing a cardboard tray of coffee. He bumped her with an apology, and one cup tipped, soaking her sleeve. That mess nudged her toward the stairs and onto the outer deck, where the wind bit and the sky felt like a wet sheet. 5 minutes later, a shudder ran through the metal under her feet. Inside, chairs smashed and glass fell like coins. The ferry groaned, skidding against something unseen. She watched through the door as the cabin pitched, watched the space where she would have sat become a scattering of luggage and little darker shapes. The outer railing flexed. A crew member yelled for life vests. Lena had this absurd thought while clasping the straps. The spilled coffee was still warm against her skin. Later, an officer said the word miracle a few times, then pivoted to paperwork. Lena said she was just in the wrong place at the right time. That night, she sat on her couch, hummingbird heart steadying, and decided it was done. Safe again. Back to ordinary. The second time arrived quietly, knotted into a chain of small, annoying decisions. Her gait changed. Her boarding group shifted. A woman wanted to sit by her partner, and Lena swapped, giving up the aisle for a seat beside the exit. She did not believe in omens, but she noticed them anyway. The tiny crack in the window shade, the way the overhead lights flickered before takeoff like a wink. Midway through the flight, something went wrong. You can hear a whole crowd stop breathing, and Lena did. The cabin dropped into that plasticky silence that pretends to be calm. The crew moved with rehearsed precision, voices like warm hands. The plane spiraled lower, then lower still, hunting a runway in a place that only happened to be there. When the wheels hit, the world became a thunder of rubber and relief. The door by Lena's knee opened with a stubborn click, because she had listened to instructions she never thought she would use. She reached for the chute, her muscles doing the remembering for her. People say odds. They say 1 in a million, as if probability were a god you can flatter. They tell Lena she is lucky, or watched over, or marked by something strange. She smiles, because what else do you do with a story like that? Maybe the strangest part is not that it happened twice, but how it turns the ordinary into evidence. A spill becomes a hinge. A seat swap becomes a prophecy. Fog becomes a character with a motive. When she walks now, Lena notices exit signs like constellations. She sits where the light touches the floor. She still arrives early. She still fastens the buckle. It is not fear that follows her. It is gratitude with a sharp edge. The world kept her twice. That feels impossible to ignore, so she doesn't. She carries the coffee stain in memory, a warm patch that never quite cools, and she keeps her eyes open for the tiny human-sized doors that show up when the big ones slam shut. I did not believe in patterns until the universe started photocopying a stranger into my day. The first sighting was easy to ignore. A crowded bus stop under a sky the colour of old denim, rain threatening, my earbuds in. I noticed him because of the scarf, a rust-red ribbon looped twice around his neck, and a sunflower pin at the knot. He was laughing at something on his phone. When my bus hissed in, I stepped on and forgot him, as you do with background characters. The second time was less ignorable. Different city, different week, a trailhead sign creaking in the wind. I was tying my shoe, and there he was at the map board, tracing the route with a finger, the same rust-red scarf hanging loose like a flag. I did a double take the way you do. When your brain trips and reaches for a memory, it cannot quite hold. We traded a quick trail etiquette smile. I hiked clockwise. He went counterclockwise. A coincidence, I told myself, and pushed it away. The third time hit like a knock. A thrift store 2 towns over, dust motes dancing in the light, a scratched record pleading from a speaker. I rounded a rack of flannel and walked straight into the sunflower pin. Up close, the petals were chipped enamel, and he was holding a ceramic cat lamp, both of us muttering sorry at the same time. He laughed, and I knew it as surely as a chord change. That laugh had been at the bus stop. It had been under the pines. I left without buying the lamp, because suddenly everything felt staged, and I did not know who was writing it. After that, I began to see him everywhere, which is to say, I began to look. A late-night diner off the highway, neon humming, the kind of place that still believes in bottomless coffee. He slid into a booth across the room, rust-red scarf looped on the hook, sunflower pin catching the jukebox glow. We both pretended not to notice. Then an airport. 2 months later, my flight delayed, my patience frayed thin. He was at the charging station, his phone at 1%, the sunflower pin like a target. The universe does not usually underline, but it bolded this. Finally, in a park where the fountain throws diamonds into the afternoon, he sat on the bench beside mine, as if he had always been scheduled. No scarf this time. The pin was there, though, shining like a dare. I let the silence stretch, then said, "I think we might be extras in each other's lives." He smiled like he had been waiting for the line and said, "I was starting to think the same thing." We traded stories like postcards. He worked freelance, bounced between gigs, cities, seasons. The scarf had been a gift. The pin was his grandmother's. He had noticed me too, he admitted. First, because I always carry a book. Second, because I always look like I might run. We sat a while listening to the fountain and agreed not to ruin it with explanations. Probability could ballpark the odds, sure, but awe makes better company. Before he left, he pinned the sunflower to my jacket for a moment, just to see how it felt, then pinned it back and walked off through the spray. I have not seen him since. But some days when the sun hits a window at a perfect angle, I catch a flash of rust red in the glass and turn, ready in case the universe is feeling playful again. The first time the town decided to notice me, it used a bench. Not a dramatic kind of bench, just the weathered one under the leaning sycamore where the path pinches toward the river. I was small enough then to swing my legs and listen to the planks creak like an old throat clearing. I slid a folded scrap beneath a loose slat, a tiny dare to the universe. It said, "If you find this, I hope the day is kind to you." I drew a crooked compass rose and signed nothing, because some wishes prefer to travel unnamed. Years passed the way years like to do, loud and then suddenly quiet. A woman named Mara came to that bench during a season when the sky seemed determined not to decide if it would rain. She was leaving here, leaving a job, leaving a version of herself. Her key ring felt heavy and her pockets felt light. She watched a dog with a bright scarf run circles around a puddle, too delighted by nothing to understand how important everything felt. When she sat, the loose board sighed and nudged the paper I had hidden. She read my note. It sounded impossibly simple in her storm, and that was the trick of it. The compass rose made no sense, and made all the sense, so she tucked it into her wallet and laughed, which startled even the dog. Then she got up and cancelled a goodbye she did not want to say. A man once brought a ring to that bench, the kind of ring that hums in a pocket, like a thundercloud waiting to crack. He rehearsed the question to the river out loud, then stood to leave and did not realize the velvet box had slipped into a slat and rested in the quiet shade beneath. He panicked later, of course, retraced footsteps, cursed the innocent cobblestones and gave up. He married anyway with a different ring and a different story. And a long time later, a child named Eli, searching for treasure with a magnet tied to string, thunked into the bench and pulled the velvet box from under the world. Eli's mother opened it there and gasped at the engraving, not of a name, but of a short phrase she and her partner said to each other every night without fail. They would not take it for themselves, not that kind of luck, but they kept the box and the story and kissed in the long green light of almost evening. There is a photograph of me I did not know existed. It came as a postcard from a second-hand shop with a handwritten price peeled halfway off. The picture shows the same bench, the same sycamore, but the edges are faded like bread left in the sun. In the foreground, a couple sits with their backs like closed doors, and in the distant blur, you can see a kid, toes not touching the ground yet, staring at the space where a secret was hidden. I turned the card over, and the only words were a date that landed on a day I thought I had imagined. Same place, different time, and the camera had done the kind of magic we forget was always there. Sometimes I wonder if places keep a quiet stack of us, layered one over the other, thin as leaves and just as persistent. If every step we take leaves a tone, a single note that can be heard later by someone who needs it. Maybe that is all coincidence is. The moment a place remembers what you asked of it, and answers with a dog's delighted circle, or a ring rescued by a string, or a stranger's scribbled compass pointing nowhere and everywhere at once. If you ever feel lost, go sit where you once waited. The air is full of messages, and the bench that watched you before is still very good at noticing. A page from a forgotten book curled itself open on its own, as if it had been waiting for a headline. It spoke of a day when noon would look like twilight and birds would fall silent. Months later, on the clips that scrolled past your thumb, the sky went dim at midday. Neighbours cheered from driveways, and for a breath the world felt scripted. How do ancient lines keep finding ways to sit beside modern news? Part of it is the language of old seers. They spoke in pictures. A river becomes a crowd. A lion becomes a ruler. Fire becomes change. Images like that can slide into new centuries and still feel at home. Yet there are moments when the fit is so clean it stuns. You find a tablet that warns of waters rising, and then a swollen coastline appears on your screen. You hear a chant about a star wandering from its path, and a sudden light streaks across a night camera in a quiet town. It is hard not to feel a thread being pulled tight. Long before traffic and timelines, voices from caves and temples answered with riddles. They said the truth sideways. A king asked if he would win, and the oracle told him a great empire would fall. He heard what he wanted, marched, and learned the riddle the hard way. We do a modern version of that. We meet a line about iron birds and think of planes. We read chariots of fire and imagine rockets. The image updates itself without asking our permission. Some prophecies do not predict the future so much as push it. A rumour of scarcity whispers through a village. People buy extra grain. Shelves thin. Prices climb. The worry makes the story real. We do this at scale now. A forecast hits a trending list. A crowd reacts in unison. The reaction becomes the event, and the echo looks like fulfillment. Then there is the pattern machine inside our heads. We are hunters of meaning. We circle the hits with bright ink and let the misses fade into the fog. We remember the one time a verse mirrored a headline and forget the many that did not. It is a human habit, not a failure. The awe is real, even when the math is messy. And sometimes the math is not messy at all. Eclipses return on steady cycles, noticed by watchers who had patience and sky. When the dark hour arrives again, it is not a miracle, but it feels like one, and the old note gets to be right again. Maybe that is the wonder of it. The past keeps speaking, and the present keeps answering, and somewhere between them we stitch meaning. When your grandmother's proverb appears in a push alert, when a dusty line hums across a brand new screen, you can let the chill run its course and still keep your wits. Close the book, walk outside, and listen. A jet draws a thin chalk line you will never quite catch. Clouds shuffle like stagehands. The sun plays peek-a-boo with the moon. A stranger hums a tune that someone hummed before cities had names. Maybe the universe is not winking. Maybe we are finally looking long enough to notice the rhyme. The doors slid shut like a punchline that arrived just a breath late, and I was on the wrong side of it. Coffee sloshed, my shoulder bumped the glass, and the taillights of the train winked like it knew. I stood there with that heavy, ridiculous feeling the universe doesn't even have to be cruel, it just has to be on time. I wandered to the little cafe on the platform to sulk and wait. The barista was moving fast, too fast, as people stacked up and coins chimed. Then a sound cut through the chatter. No sound. She was coughing, then not coughing, hands to her throat, eyes wide. A cup fell and shattered. Everyone froze in that familiar, terrible moment where we all look at each other, hoping someone else will step into the story. "Are you okay?" I asked, already rounding the counter. She shook her head, lips a blue I will never forget. I had learned the Heimlich in a first aid class a friend dragged me to, and my body remembered before my brain did. 2 quick thrusts, a lodged blueberry breaks free, air returns like floodlight. She collapsed into a chair, gasping, laughing, crying. The room exhaled. It was over. A train had left. A life had not. Delays feel like theft. But sometimes the missing piece is the saving piece. Not punishment, a pivot. Not a failure of the plan rewriting itself. Psychologically, our minds are allergic to uncertainty. We would rather be mad at a closed door than curious about the hallway it reveals. We stitch stories that make sense and skip the ones that require patience. But some days, the story is only visible in hindsight, when the thread glints in the light and you notice it was pulling you sideways on purpose. A friend once missed a flight because their phone died in the night. They woke to shock, then scramble, then a stunned, empty hour. That hour put them on their porch as their neighbour's father stumbled into the yard, face slack, words gone. They saw it, called, waited with him, handed the phone to panicked hands, flagged down the ambulance. Minutes mattered, the doctor said later. A missed flight became the difference between a life drifting and a life returned gently to shore. We think of clocks as judges, but they are also editors. The sentence you were rushing into gets revised without asking you first. It is jarring. It is annoying. It can be infuriating. And yet, what if the schedule isn't an order? What if it's a conversation, one where you get to answer by how you show up to the moment you did not choose? Here's a small reframe to keep in your pocket. Delay doesn't just take time. It gives you a vantage point. Not, why is this happening to me, but what did this just make visible? Not, I'm behind, but I'm in a different scene. What can I do from here? The difference doesn't erase the frustration. It invites a second emotion to sit beside the first. Curiosity. It opens a door you didn't know you needed. So when a plan pulls away, let the sting land. Sigh if you need to. Then look up, listen. Check on someone, step toward what is in front of you. It might be nothing. It might be everything. Sometimes being saved looks a lot like being delayed. Last night, 2 alarms went off that no one set. In 2 different bedrooms, in 2 different cities, 2 people shot upright at the same instant, hearts racing, the air still charged with something that felt like static. One of them reached for a phone. It was already ringing. The other was calling to say, "You were there." They start describing what they saw, and the breath catches. An empty fairground under a pearly sky. A carousel that did not spin. Paint peeling from a row of wooden horses. The gold trim tarnished. A red scarf draped over the rail like a warning. Somewhere, a slow whistle. The kind that sounds like wind, but carries a melody you almost recognize. A long shadow moves where no person stands. A name is called soft, like it is afraid to be heard. They speak over each other, tripping on the same details. Both swear they pressed a coin into a slot that did not exist. Both say the floor was wet, not with rain, but with the cold shine of a recently washed stage. Both remember resting a palm on one horse's faded blue flank and feeling splinters press into their skin. They know the smell of it too. Old sugar, dust, machine grease. It is not a dream you forget in daylight. They had not texted that day. No shared movie, no story, no inside joke that might have seeded the same image. They live hours apart. If you want to be rational, there are explanations. Brains lean on the same library of symbols. Carousels are for childhood. nostalgia, repetition. Weather can sink sleep. Maybe a song in a grocery store slipped into both heads and built the same scaffolding behind the scenes. But this is where it tightens. One says, "Do you remember the woman running along the fence?" The other freezes. Yes, the woman in the coat with the missing button. The one who turned, lifted a hand, and let a single glove drop. That exact moment was the jolt that woke them. They both say the glove landed in a puddle and did not sink, so they try to break it. Each hangs up, sketches what they saw, without speaking. They meet later and lay the drawings side by side. The same angle, the same scarf, the same tilt of a broken horse ear, and the name whispered in the dream. An old teacher's name, someone neither had thought about in years. No easy breadcrumb trail, no link on a timeline. If your mind wants order, it will reach for it. Maybe it was the moon. Maybe the memory of a childhood fair leaked from one conversation months ago and grew across distance. Maybe the odds are not as impossible as they feel. And two dice can land on the same scarred wood 1,000 times before you notice. Still, it does something to you, knowing that in the quiet hours, when brains are busy stitching fragments into stories, two separate minds can walk into the same room and look out the same window. If it ever happens to you, write it down before daylight rinses it away. Trade notes. Ask small questions. Resist the urge to lead each other. See what lines up and what refuses to. Or maybe, just maybe, dreams are not locked behind our foreheads at all. Maybe they are weather systems, and every so often, two of us step out into the same invisible rain. A melody gets written in a cramped apartment, and years later, the world seems to walk straight into its verses like a scene it already knows. That is the strange electricity of it. A line you once sang in traffic, trivial and catchy, suddenly feels like a headline you saw this morning. You feel a shiver, and for a second it is easier to believe the song saw the future than to admit we missed the pattern until now. Here is a way to hold it. Songs are time capsules, yes, but they are also weather vanes. Artists write about what sits in the air, unease and hope, names and places, storms and bright mornings. When the future finally arrives, it wears familiar colours because we have been sketching those colours all along. Psychologically, our minds stitch scattered notes into a chorus, searching for cause inside coincidence, because stories make randomness feel safe and meaningful. Think about a simple moment. You and a friend used to joke about a lyric that painted empty streets at noon. It was moody and dramatic, and then a year came when the streets actually went quiet. Your friend texts, "Remember that track?" And the lyric isn't just clever anymore. It feels eerie, like the songwriter mailed a postcard from tomorrow. Or consider the time a throwaway line in a verse mentioned a city and a date, and much later the news echoed both. You did not remember the hundreds of songs that mentioned other cities and other dates and led nowhere. You remembered the one that landed. That is how our attention works. We circle the bullseye after the arrow hits, then tell ourselves it could not have been chance. The truth is, art and life do not stand on opposite sides. They pollinate each other. A lyric borrows from headlines, then years later, the headlines borrow its language back. A writer scribbles an image of a tower or a tidal wave, not because they know the calendar, but because those images live in all of us. When reality mirrors the metaphor, it feels prophetic. In a way, it is. Not in the mystical sense, but in the very human way that the future keeps arriving along the same paths we have walked before. Our brains are pattern hungry. We feel what we look for, and we find what we name. If you like the mystery, keep it. Let the goosebumps do their small dance. But if you want a gentler explanation, Here is one. We remember the hits and forget the misses. And after something big happens, we scan old lyrics for mirrors, not clocks. It makes us feel connected, like the song had its hand on our shoulder the whole time. There is comfort in that, and maybe even a nudge, because whether or not a verse foresees anything, it still sharpens our attention. It asks us to notice the signals we usually ignore and to admit that life often rhymes before it repeats. That is a useful reframe. It swaps certainty for curiosity and turns eerie coincidence into a reason to listen closer to both the music and the moment we are in. So when a lyric seems to come true, let it widen your eyes. Call it prophecy if you like, or call it the echo between imagination and reality. Either way, it invites you to tune in, and that, more than prediction, is the real magic. Somewhere between fate and chance, a door creaks, and the past walks in wearing today's shoes. You feel it when a headline sounds familiar, when a name repeats, when the world clears its throat and speaks the same line twice. Take the old, persistent rhyme between Abraham Lincoln and John Kennedy. Each rose to Congress a century apart. Each reached the presidency a century apart. Each met the end on a Friday. Both were cut down in the head. Both left the nation to a man named Johnson. One led in a time of a divided union, the other in a moment of Cold War fracture, and yet their exits carry the same solemn footfall. People make too much of the smaller bits, stretching facts until they squeak, but the large notes still ring. It is an echo you can feel without believing in a script. Then there is the strange case of a ship imagined before it sailed. In the late 19th century, a writer pictured a great ocean liner, the largest ever, called the Titan. He imagined marketing that flaunted its invincibility. He imagined too few lifeboats. He imagined an iceberg in the North Atlantic, in the chill of April on a dark, starry night. Years later, the Titanic met the water, and the water did not blink. The facts do not line up like a perfect mirror, but they rhyme like rain on two different rooftops. A boy named Samuel Clemens was born when a wandering light blazed across the sky. Folks called it Halley's Comet. As a man, he said he came in with the comet and meant to go out with it. He took the name Mark Twain and put America on paper, and when the comet returned decades later, he slipped away. He did not cause it. The comet did not choose him, but the timing made a neat circle, and our hearts are schools of fish that chase neat circles. Legends cling to bones too. In Central Asia, archaeologists opened the tomb of a conqueror whose shadow still stretched across the steppe. A warning etched in memory or myth promised calamity if the rest was disturbed. Not long after, a warlord from the west rolled his machines into the same lands, and people whispered that the lid should never have been lifted. Later, when the remains were put back with honour, the tide of war began to turn. Is this cause-effect, or a story we tell to make a jagged age feel smooth? The echo is there either way. Even on smaller scales, history enjoys a wink. A king in Italy meets a baker who shares his name, his hometown, and even his birthday. They marvel at the parallels, laugh in the same cadence, and that night the king dies in an attack. And the baker too meets a sudden end. The odds are long. The story survives because it tastes like a magic trick. Maybe echoes are not loops of fate, but the ways our minds search for rhythm. We are pattern hunters, beating meaning out of noise like drums out of skins. Still, when another century turns and footsteps sound familiar, listen. The past does not repeat, but it hums. Some notes drift back, some notes transform, and some notes wait for us to finally sing. It starts with a whisper that dares the universe to answer. A soldier laughs from a rampart, waving to his friends, and tosses a line over his shoulder, "They cannot hit me from here." The wind carries his arrogance like a paper kite. Then the world snaps, sharp and metallic, and the moment becomes a legend people repeat around campfires for years. A poet, pale with fever, tells a friend not to wake them because morning will not matter. They close their eyes, and the last leaf on the tree outside is blown off its branch. By afternoon, the bed is empty, but for the dent in the pillow and the sentence that now feels like a prophecy carved in stone. An old actor jokes that the curtain better fall before his punchline does. His family laughs, grateful for the bravado. Hours later, the house is quiet, the lights dimmed, and someone remembers that line and wonders whether he knew, whether bodies learn the slope of the ridge long before the mind does. What is it about the final breath that makes it sound like it is speaking to fate? Maybe it is because a last sentence is a net, and the future is the one fish we want to catch inside it. We comb through a lifetime of chatter, of rants about the weather and lost keys, but we do not archive those. We hold on to the lines that feel like a door creaking open, just as someone walks through. There is a trick of memory at work, too. We hear a line, we watch what follows, and then we glue those pieces together and call them destiny. If the poet wakes, the dinner burns, the dog barks, and life trudges on, we forget the sentence. If the poet does not, the sentence becomes a beacon. Our minds are gardeners that favour the flowers that fit the path we already built. Yet there is also the animal hush of intuition, the way a room changes tone in the hour before a storm. Hearts give small signals. Lungs keep secret rhythm. Skin chills at the edge of the cliff. Sometimes a last sentence is not magic, but measurement, a quiet reading of the instruments within. It just sounds like a spell because we only translate it after the end. And still, some of these goodbyes feel too neat to be random. Maybe we are not predicting the future so much as choosing a final sentence to hold the life that came before it. The soldier's swagger is really a lifetime of bravado distilled. The poet's sigh is a habit of tasting endings before they arrive. The actor's joke is devotion to the laugh, even as the spotlight cools. We call it coincidence because the cosmos never signs its work. But we carry those lines like coins in a pocket, rubbing them smooth from retelling. They are not keys to fate, only mirrors that catch two truths at once, that endings surprise us, and that we are always, even at the last breath, trying to make sense of the same mystery. Two clocks stop at the same minute in different houses and no one winds them again. That's how the story is first told. Two strangers, no relation, leaving the world on the same date, on a calm weekday that suddenly feels charged. The air doesn't change. The streetlights still flick on. But the date becomes heavier, as if the calendar itself took a breath and held it. Picture them. In a sunlit kitchen, a quiet man stacks the last of his mail and sets a single coin on top, a small ritual he never explains. Miles away, in a city apartment that hums even at midnight, a woman waters the fern she rescued from the office, turns off her radio, and folds the day to a close. They never meet. They would have passed each other in a crowd without a second glance. Yet by nightfall, both are gone. Same date, same shared silence. The mind rushes in, eager to connect what life kept apart. Were their lives parallel in some hidden way? Did their stories rhyme? We look for echoes. Both loved small routines. Both carried kindness through the room like a warm cup. Both kept coins in a dish near the door. The coin becomes a symbol, the dish a hinge, and suddenly their separate days feel like mirror halves of one strange whole. What are the odds? Psychologically, our brains are meaning-making machines, primed to notice rare alignments and treat them like messages. That's part of why a date that repeats across two lives can feel almost orchestrated. We gather clues, polish them, and fit them together until the picture glows. But here's another way to hold it. Not as proof of fate. As a window. A coincidence like this pulls us out of the routine fog and makes us pay attention. It asks us to zoom in on the ordinary details that usually blur. The mail stacked neatly, the fern that somehow keeps living, the small coin left on the pile, the radio turned off at the same gentle volume every night. Instead of demanding a grand design, what if the point is the pause? The way we suddenly see the texture of a life. Consider how we talk about dates. Birthdays, anniversaries, last days. We give them capital letters and a permanent seat at the table. A shared date between two people who never met is not a sentence to solve. It's a bridge to walk slowly. On that bridge, we can honour what made each life vivid, without forcing a secret thread to explain everything. We can let the nearness of that day remind us that nearness exists at all, between strangers on buses, neighbours whose names we never learn, and faces we pass without noticing until something makes us look again. There is room for wonder without the pressure to decode it. There is space to marvel, to feel the strangeness, and still admit the simplest truth. Two people mattered, and so the same date carries double weight. If the story gives you chills, keep them. If it softens your voice, let it. Hold the coin. Water the fern. Notice the dish by the door. Then whisper the date like a vow to pay attention. Not to fate's hidden blueprint, but to the beautiful, ordinary lives that fill the days we share. A bus turns the corner, a song begins, and your spine answers with a chill as if the world just winked at you. That feeling, the hush between heartbeat and meaning, is where the synchronicity coincidence lives. It is the moment when the world seems to line up the bowling pins in secret, then hands you a ball with your name already written on it. Maybe you have felt it. You think of someone you have not spoken to in years, and before you can scroll or search, there they are in your inbox with a subject line that says the exact word you just whispered. Or you are wandering a thrift shop, trailing your fingers along the spines of long forgotten stories, and a book slides free. Inside, a margin note matches your handwriting, though you know you never owned it. You step outside and the clouds part with theatrical timing. A license plate glints a phrase you have been chewing on for days. It feels like an orchestra you cannot see is tuning to the key of your life. Of course, the mind is a pattern hunter. It loves threads and mirrors and secret doors. It will call a coincidence a sign because signs are soothing. But every now and then, the coincidence does not just rhyme with your day, it harmonizes with it. A chance meeting answers an unasked question. A cancelled train nudges you into a cafe where you overhear the exact advice you needed. You did not plan it. You could not have planned it, and yet it fits you like a jacket that has been waiting on the back of a chair. Call it grace. Call it chance. Call it the brain doing cartwheels. The label matters less than the experience of being seen by reality, if only for a breath. There is a humility in that. You are not the puppet master, but neither are you lost in a storm without coordinates. You are part of a choreography that occasionally reveals its ink. When it does, the air tastes a little sweeter, the day sits up straighter, and you consider, just for a moment, that the universe conspires for more than entropy. Here is the secret. You do not have to force it. You do not have to make a vision board or whisper a spell to coax the world into winking. You only have to notice. Notice the words that repeat like a drum beat across your week. Notice the names that arrive in clusters. Notice the way a problem you dread keeps intersecting with the same strange symbol, as if the answer prefers to travel in costume. Curiosity is the hinge. When it swings open, you are not inventing patterns so much as letting them introduce themselves. And when the next coincidence arrives, resist the urge to shrug it off or worship it. Let it be an invitation. Ask a simple question. What wants to happen here? Maybe it is a phone call you have been delaying. Maybe it is a walk you have been postponing. Maybe it is nothing but a smile and a story. Either way, follow the thread a little. See where it leads. The world might wink again, and this time, you will wink back. The first time a stranger rearranged my past, it was because of a shoebox that rattled like rain. I found it at a Saturday yard sale, under a card table with chipped vases and a typewriter that smelled like dust and ink. The box was packed with old photographs, edges feathered, corners softened by thumbs I would never meet. I bought it for the frames, but the pictures did what pictures do. They opened and the room widened. They were simple moments at first. A picnic on a blanket, the colour of lemonade. A front porch painted sea green. A winter street with breath fogging from bundled mouths. Then a detail snagged me. In one backyard snapshot, a kid in a dinosaur shirt holds up his cast for the camera, and the cast is covered in doodles that I recognised. I had drawn those exact lopsided stars. I had broken my wrist, falling off a backyard swing. The summer I learned the word radius. That was me. The smaller me, centre left, half hidden by a dog that had a name I can still taste but not say. The photo wasn't from our family albums. It wasn't from our house. I started laying the photos like a map. A woman with a heart-shaped birthmark near her eye kept appearing, sometimes in focus, sometimes in background blur. At a boardwalk with a paper cone of fries, on a hospital ward in a light blue nurse's uniform, in a church basement serving coffee from a silver urn. In a wedding photo, the bride is hugging someone wearing a tiny locket shaped like an almond, and the locket matched the one my grandmother kept by her bedside. Flip the photo, and the date on the back was the weekend. My grandmother always claimed she went to see the ocean alone. I brought the wedding photo to my grandmother. She sat with it quiet, thumb rubbing the gloss to fog. "That was June," she said. "Not the bride. The other one, I was supposed to witness." We missed the bus and made a different memory. Then she smiled at the locket and said, "I lent it out when I still believed in lending." She had never mentioned June before. Another photo showed a parade, a high school band turning the corner at twilight, brass catching the last peach light. There, over the clarinet section, is a face I know now better than my own. My wife as a teenager, hair pulled back, laughing at someone just out of frame. Next to her is the birthmark woman again, older this time, clapping from the curb. The date on the back is years before we met, and the town stamped on the pharmacy envelope is a place I had never visited until I moved there for work and sat across a table from a girl with that exact laugh. We spread the photos on our kitchen table until the table disappeared. In a hospital hallway shot, the nurse is handing a swaddled baby to a tired mother. My wife pointed. "That nurse signed my discharge papers," she said. Another photo, a picnic, a string of kites like bright punctuation marks. In the glass door of a snack shack, the reflection captured a boy with a cast and a girl with a ponytail passing each other without looking up. We found the obituary tucked among the envelopes. Her name was Ruth. Travelling nurse, public transit rider, a person who believed in keeping a camera within arm's reach. She wasn't trying to collect anyone, she just loved proof. She moved, she healed, she took pictures, and somehow she stitched us. She was at the picnic, where my father told the joke we still tell at dinner. She was at the parade, where my wife learned to move in step. Without knowing it, she threaded our lives through a spool of quiet snaps and light leaks. We put the photos back, this time in an order that felt like a story. Some connections are loud, others whisper from old paper. You think you find them by accident. Maybe that's true. Or maybe they were always waiting, already there, frozen in the background, patiently teaching you that strangers are often the ones holding your history still. Forget soulmates. Sometimes two lives collide because 10 digits happen to stand in the same order at the same time. A phone buzzes, a name you do not know flashes on the screen, and that is how a new thread gets tied to yours without permission. There was a man who kept getting sweet, rambling texts from someone signing off as Aunt D. He wrote back gently, "Wrong number, sorry." The messages kept coming anyway. Tiny updates about weather and recipes and the neighbour's new puppy. He could have blocked the sender, but instead he started forwarding each note to his own aunt, who lived across the country and hated the phone. Weeks later, his aunt called him out of the blue, laughing, telling him those forwarded messages pushed her to call her estranged sister, the original Aunt D, who had been waiting for a sign to reach out. The wrong number did not belong to anyone they knew. The right conversation still happened. A woman moved to a new city and bought a cheap plan with a recycled number. Within days, calls poured in for a name she had never heard. She muted them at first, but one voicemail made her pause. A birthday song, off-key and hopeful. The caller mentioned a bakery on the corner and a lemon cake with blue frosting. The woman saved the message, then walked to that bakery just to see. On the bulletin board near the door was a snapshot of a boy holding a lemon cake with blue frosting, and underneath a handwritten number missing just one digit from her own. She scribbled a note. Later that afternoon, she met the boy's grandmother, who explained that the number used to be his father's, who had passed away. Now, every year they called and sang anyway. Together, they dialed the correct digit and sang again. The new number had not stolen a memory. It had delivered it. A delivery driver was late and flustered, tapping a contact and listening while the call rang and rang. When someone finally answered, he heard a beeping alarm, then silence. He tried again. Same beeping, and the faint hiss of something wrong. He hung up, felt a strange pull, and called emergency services. Firefighters later said a small kitchen fire had barely started and that an elderly man had been drifting to sleep in the next room. The man's daughter had typed her number wrong on the account form by a single digit. The driver had dialed the number above hers by accident. 10 digits, shifted by 1, became a siren. 2 numbers lived next door to each other in the digital sense, separated by a single integer. One woman kept getting texts meant for the other about a prescription pickup. She finally replied, friendly and practical. They traded a few polite messages and joked that they were address neighbours. Months later, the first woman arrived at a clinic, and the receptionist mixed up their files. The other woman reached the desk at the same moment. They recognized the cadence of each other's messages before their faces. They ended up splitting a cab home, and by the time the meter stopped, they had planned coffee. The next spring, one was a bridesmaid at the other's wedding. Maybe numbers are nothing more than math. Maybe they are the universe's lazy shorthand, handing us a way to find one another. Either way, somewhere, a phone will buzz with a stranger's name, and a door you did not know existed will swing open just enough for you to see who is on the other side. A red sedan, a wet Tuesday, and a line of traffic that refused to move. That is where it began, with wipers ticking like a metronome and my throat tasting like the last thing I wanted to say. I had packed a bag, slammed a door, told myself I was done, and then the universe idled in front of me like it had something to add. The license plate was so ordinary, I almost missed it. 4 letters, 3 numbers, a little rust around the screws, MEND, and then 113. Mend 113. It was the kind of coincidence you could shrug off if it did not land so squarely on the softest part of your life. Our first apartment had been 113, a crooked number on a crooked door, in a building that smelled like old books and burnt toast, the place where we learned how to share a calendar and a blanket and a life. Mend 113. I laughed once, the sound catching on itself. The light turned green, but I did not move. I stared at the plate until the car behind me tapped the horn, and in that tiny burst of impatience I heard my father's old line, the one he used when the world opened a door you did not plan on. Look up when the tap comes. I put on my blinker and slipped into the right lane. I did not have a plan, only a feeling that I should not keep driving away from the place where we started. The rain softened to a mist. The red sedan turned left, turned right, and I kept finding myself behind it as if we were stitched together. I was not following so much as agreeing. When it finally peeled off into a grocery lot, I kept going, heart drumming, the word mend tugging like a sleeve. By the time I reached our street, the fight had rewritten itself in my head. It was not about the dishes or the trip we could not afford. It was about fear, which is always louder than it needs to be. I parked crooked on purpose, like we used to, and ran up the stairs, and the key slipped, and I swore, and then I was inside. She was sitting on the floor with the bag by the door, knuckles white around the handle, eyes blown wide like she had been staring at a wall and found it staring back. I said her name, like it was the only word that made sense. I said mend. She laughed through a sob, the way I had in the car, and she said, "You saw it too?" The plate? I nodded. 113. We did not solve everything in that hour. We apologized like people who mean it, which is to say we made promises we had to keep with actions, not words. But there are arrows you only need once. Weeks later, we kept seeing them anyway. On a morning walk, an old sedan idled at the crosswalk with letters we did not expect. TRY. At a gas station after a hard day, STAY. On a late summer night, one more MEND, 113. Our child will be born in January on the 13th, with a laugh like rain on glass. Destiny, maybe, or a city full of plates and a brain that loves patterns. I do not pretend to know. I just know that sometimes the road coughs up a word and the numbers that matter, and if you look up when the tap comes, you might turn the wheel in time. Some doors choose their people. Ask for something with a view. Ask for anything quiet, and the desk clerk smiles, shuffles papers, and you end up cradling the same brass key that has learned one lock too well. In 1954, Greta arrived with a suitcase that smelled like oranges and a heart that pretended it was not recently broken. The clerk, distracted by a ringing phone and a squeaking luggage cart, slid a key across the counter. Top floor, end of the hall, the room with the stubborn lamp and the balcony that leaned a little over the tide. Greta unpacked slowly, found a postcard tucked into a dresser drawer, the picture of a crooked pier and a gull mid-flight. She turned it over and wrote, "If this finds you, tell me you felt the same wind." She slid it under the mattress like a whisper and left before dawn, certain she had dreamed the sea starlight into being. In 1983, a guitarist named Felix stumbled in after a gig that paid in pizza and applause that did not stick. He had asked for a room on a lower floor, but a wedding party claimed them all, so the desk offered the one at the end of the hall. The balcony groaned, the same way the guitar case did. Felix opened the dresser, looking for a Bible, found a postcard instead. The ink had bloomed into the paper like a bruise. "If this finds you." He pressed his thumb to the curve of the gull, smiling. He added, "It does." I heard the wind through the strings. He slid it behind the radiator, where the paint was chipped in the shape of a moth, and slept with the door cracked to let the ocean find him. 2001 brought storms that made the lights blink like the building was thinking too hard. Mira checked in on a night when flights were grounded and arguments drifted up the stairwell. She had not planned to stay. A conference had spilled over every room, but a computer error had left one key unclaimed. Same hallway, same dented lamp. She woke to the hum of the air vent and, out of boredom, unscrewed the grate. The postcard sighed into her palm, edges thin as old leaves. She read the 2 lines and added a third. "The wind is a chorus, and I am learning the harmony." Then she tucked it into the lining of the curtain, where the sun dyed everything the colour of marmalade. By 2019, Raya's bus had broken down twice, and she arrived with damp hair and a laugh that refused to fray. Fully booked except, the clerk said, for one room that never seemed to keep a reservation. She took it with a shrug. The balcony still leaned, the salt still crusted the railing like sugar. While pulling the curtain, she felt paper brush her fingers. The gull still flew. 4 words bloomed across decades. Raya added a 5th line. "If you are reading this, we are neighbours across time." She tucked it under the knob of the bedside drawer, where hands would find it by accident, the way a melody finds the mouth of a stranger who has never heard it and sings anyway. Years later, a woman with silver hair and a scarf that smelled faintly of oranges leaned on the counter and asked for anything near the elevator. The elevator was out. The desk apologised and offered the end of the hall. In the room, she laughed once, soft, like a secret finally getting air. She opened the drawer and the postcard looked up, layered with voices. Greta touched her old handwriting, and the younger ones, the middle ones, the ones that waited for her to return. She took a pen and wrote, "I came back. The wind is still here. Some doors do not lock behind you. They remember, and if you listen, they choose you again. The first time it taps your shoulder, you laugh. The third time, you look around, and then it's on the coffee receipt, glowing on the microwave, painted on the door you walk past without thinking. A tiny echo tucked into your day, repeating, repeating. Here's the simple idea. Once a number matters to you, your mind quietly tags it, like a song you can't get out of your head, and suddenly it's everywhere. Picture this. A friend says, "It keeps happening." I'll glance at my phone and it's 11:11. I get a ride share and the license ends in 11. I check out and the total is $11.11. You smile because you have your own number story. Maybe it's the apartment you grew up in. Maybe it was your jersey from school. Maybe it was the date something beautiful began. Once it clicks, it follows. Psychologically, our attention is a spotlight, not a floodlight. When the mind decides a pattern is meaningful, selective attention does the rest. And then another habit kicks in. We count the hits and forget the misses, and the pattern tightens its loop. That's not you being foolish. It's your brain doing what it evolved to do, save effort by noticing what it thinks matters. Mentioning the psychology gives shape to the mystery and reminds us there's a human reason behind the magic, but meaning is allowed here. That number can be a private nudge, a gentle bell that rings you back to the present. Think of it the way hikers tie a bright ribbon to a tree to mark the trail. When it shows up, you can use it. A breath, a small check-in. Where am I? What was I just thinking? What do I want to remember? This turns coincidence into a cue. Here's what it looks like in real life. You're stressed and scrolling, and there it is again. Instead of doom scrolling, you treat it as a pause button. You stretch your shoulders. You drink some water. You send the text you've been avoiding. Or you name a feeling out loud. Okay, I'm anxious about that meeting. So it's not just buzzing in the background. You choose a tiny action that nudges the day by 1 degree. It's ordinary. It's powerful. You can also use it to anchor a habit. Each time the number appears, you write a single line in a notes app. One thing you're grateful for, one thing you're learning. Or you practice a 30-second reset. Eyes off the screen, one slow breath in, one slow breath out. Over time, the number becomes a thread you can hold, a way to stitch scattered moments back together. There's room for wonder too. We are pattern-making creatures, and sometimes the pattern feels like it's winking at us. Let it be a companion, not a command. If it starts to feel heavy, name that. If it feels light, keep it light. The point is not to pass a cosmic test. It's to turn a spark of attention into care for your life. In the end, whether it's magic or mind, the meaning you give it changes what you notice next. That's the quiet miracle of attention. A small pattern repeats, and with it, your chance to show up. A number appears again, and again you choose. It's the same coincidence, and it becomes your reminder. The city kept handing me the same face, like a playing card that refuses to be shuffled in. Morning rush, paper cup sweating in my palm. I saw them across the platform, a green scarf, a half smile, the careful way they stood away from the yellow line. We traded that quick stranger's glance, and the train swallowed us. Easy to forget. Except I didn't. And the city didn't either. An afternoon later, I'm in a coffee shop I never visit, the kind of place where the barista writes fortunes on lids. I look up, and the green scarf is there, laughing with the cashier, tapping a chipped mug tattoo on their wrist. It felt like the universe cleared its throat. We did that awkward nod people do when they recognize someone but don't know why. Still, I said nothing. I sipped my fortune and left with a story I didn't yet believe. Then came traffic lights that blinked us into alignment. I rerouted to a different street to dodge construction, only to stop at the same crosswalk as the same stranger. Same scarf, same wrist, same way of looking everywhere but at me. How many people live here? How many steps between one life and another? I told myself it was nothing. I told myself the city is a spiral and we were just catching the same curve. I told myself a lot because it felt easier than admitting that something was tugging. So I ran a tiny experiment. The next day, I left early. I left late. I took the bus. I walked. I ducked into a bookstore that smells like old rain and found a book about probability, which felt like a cosmic prank. And there they were again, bent over the same shelf. I laughed out loud, a weird, sharp sound that startled us both. They looked up. I looked down. The moment passed, and I pretended to care deeply about a footnote. By then, it had started to feel not like chance, but like a rhythm. The universe wasn't shouting. It was humming the same few notes until I recognized the song. Every time I looked away, I thought about the things we miss, because we decide we are not the sort of person who interrupts a stranger's day. because we decide that meaning must wear a neon sign or it isn't real. The last time, I didn't get a choice. My keys slipped out of my pocket, clattering like a wind chime against the concrete. I turned to chase them and ran straight into the green scarf, the chipped mug, the half smile that became a whole one. "We keep doing this," they said, amused as if we'd been rehearsing. I said yes, finally, and introduced myself. Their name felt familiar the way a dream does, known and impossible. We stood there too long, saying small things that felt like big ones, marvelling at how many almosts had been stacked to reach a hello. Later, I thought about how coincidence can be a breadcrumb trail. Maybe fate isn't thunder. Maybe it's repetition. Maybe the world is patient, and it will show you the same door until you are ready to walk through it. The next time the same stranger appears, notice the hum. Let the card be dealt again. And if your heart answers, answer back. Say hello. I thought small talk was safe until the humming started. Two grandmothers on opposite ends of a backyard, both stirring lemonade, both quietly drifting into the same strange lullaby. Not the one everyone knows. This was a tune, with a dip in the middle, like a sigh. One paused where the other picked up. The yard went quiet, like we had all heard a key turn in a door none of us knew was there. "Where did you learn that?" they asked each other. "From my mother," said one. "From my mother," said the other. Then the names. One said Anya, the other said Anna. A shrug. A coincidence. But it stuck to the air. Somebody had brought albums, the kind with plastic pages and little static crackles when you peel them open. We started flipping. Family trees in spirals of hairstyles, birthdays, ships, front steps, faces that knew hard winters and bright kitchens. Then we found her. A woman on a studio stool with a chin slightly tilted and a porcelain brooch pinned high like a small moon. The caption under the photo in one album read, "Anya, Bakery Steps, Spring." The same photo in the other album said, "Anna, Day of the Train, Leave Taking, Same Dress, Same Brooch, Same Small Moon." There was a stamp on the back of one print from a photographer in a town that none of us lived in. Someone Googled the address and it was now a florist. Someone else found a folded letter tucked beneath the photo, written in looping ink that leaned so far right it looked ready to run. The letter spoke of water rising, of a hurried train, of a promise to return, of a new name chosen from a Saint's Day calendar because it matched the rhythm of the old one. The grandmothers sat down with their lemonade and began to build a bridge out of details. There was the story about a flood that swept through a market. There was the missing week when a cousin slept in a church and the bells sounded like spoons in a jar. There was the brooch that had always been described as chipped, though none of us had noticed the tiny nick near its edge until we put both photos side by side. It was not scandalous, just human. A young woman separated from her people in a season of too much water and too little time, ferried to a new town with a new name and a life that had to begin at once. She married there, she had children. Years later, she found her way back to the old region, found familiar faces, and was folded into the family again, a secret wrapped in a silence that felt like protection. The two branches grew unaware of each other, leafing out across decades, waving in the same wind. So our family trees overlapped, not by marriage papers or careful plans, but by a runaway melody and a small chipped moon. The room felt smaller and bigger at the same time. We were not strangers at a barbecue anymore. We were two sets of descendants holding the same thread from opposite ends, finally tugging at it until it tied into a knot you could feel with your fingers. Every coincidence feels impossible until the ordinary details line up and take a bow. A tune, a brooch, a letter, a name spoken two ways, and suddenly the map of who you are makes a new, beautifully messy kind of sense. A thin winter sun lifts over an Ohio city, and in one hospital, a baby fills the corridor with a stubborn cry. Across town, in the same city, another newborn grabs at the air like it already knows there is something big waiting beyond the window. No one notices the echo. No one imagines that these two first breaths belong to the same story. Akron is rubber and rails, grit and fogged windows, a place where the map of America folds and creases. In one corner of that map, a boy grows tall and fast, strong enough to outrun trouble, gentle enough to carry the hopes of a neighborhood on his back. He learns to turn empty gyms into cathedrals, where a single ball can quiet every doubt. In another corner, a boy grows light on his feet. With a shot that leaves his hand like a secret told to the air, he learns patience, the way rhythm can do more than raw force ever could. Years roll over them like waves. One boy moves often, carrying a duffel and a promise, finding mentors in teachers and coaches who see a spark you can feel across a court. The other follows the game wherever it leads, sitting on the end of benches, studying angles, trusting that the line from hand to hoop is a language he can master. They don't know the other exists. The shared birthplace is just a shared sky, a coincidence with no reason to speak up, but the game has its own way of stitching lives together. The league's lights turn on. One name becomes a headline across the world, a story of return and redemption, a hometown stitched to his chest. The other becomes a revolution in sneakers, bending distance into a dare, making deep shots feel inevitable. The court becomes a stage, and fate finds a date for both of them under the same glare. They meet at centre court with cameras glaring and the weight of cities behind them. 4 Junaires in a row. The bracket points them toward each other like iron to a magnet. One attacks the rim like it owes him something. The other tilts the floor from 30 feet, smiling as the net snaps. They trade runs, trade moments, trade the kind of memories that turn into folklore, a chase-down block that erases certainty, a quick release that turns silence into thunder. Coaches scribble, fans hold their breath, and somewhere in Ohio someone whispers, "Same city. What are the odds?" Out of all the hospitals, all the towns, all the days, 2 kids begin in the same place and spend years moving in opposite directions, only to collide at the exact centre of their era. The ball does not care about birth certificates, and yet the symmetry feels too neat to ignore. It is like the city made a coin with 2 different faces and flipped it high, letting gravity pull both sides back to the same showdown again and again. The buzzer fades, the banners hang, the echoes linger, and back in that Ohio city the streets carry on, ordinary as ever. Maybe that is the strangest part. The world looks simple until it doesn't. Until one quiet coincidence reminds you that beginnings can be neighbours, even when destinies are rivals. A name scrawled on a damp napkin keeps turning up at the edges of the worst nights. Not a villain's signature, not a secret society's stamp, just a name that appears, again and again, inside stories that should never have met. Here's the idea to hold on to. Separate tragedies can share quiet threads. The kind you don't notice until you pull one and feel a tug from somewhere else. What looks impossible is often a web we only learn to see after the fact. One autumn night, a county bus ran late by a whisper of time. The driver paused to help a man scoop fallen apples back into a paper bag, the kind that turns to lace in the rain. "I've got you," the driver said, and he meant it. That small kindness added a minute, maybe 2. Up the road, fog wrapped the mountain in a wool blanket, and when the bus finally rounded the bend, headlights met milk-white air. Tires caught gravel. Steel complained. A guardrail failed to be enough. Across town, a nurse waiting for that same bus checked the schedule, then sighed and walked. "It's fine," she murmured to herself, boots ticking against puddles. Home earlier than usual, she switched on a space heater and set a tea kettle on the coil. A fizzing outlet, a tired wire behind the wall, a spark leaping like it had a destination. All of it began its quiet argument with the night. Sirens split the dark in two directions at once. Two scenes, two tragedies, one delay that was no one's fault and everyone's burden. Later, investigators stitched timelines. The bus had left the depot holding a half-empty thermos with a taped-on label, Ellis, the same name, on the electrician's invoice from the nurses' building the month before. A coincidence, they shrugged. Still, they circled it in red ink. Ellis repaired a stairwell light, not the outlet, but the name sat there like a pin in a map that starts to look like a constellation. This is how these stories braid themselves. In a coastal town, a trawler capsized after a hurried refit. Inland, weeks later, a restaurant ventilation fan sparked a kitchen blaze. No shared weather, no shared wiring, but both had salvaged parts from the same auction lot, stamped with a factory number retired years ago. Two separate losses, one hidden provenance, two tiny stamps that nobody read until someone finally did. Psychologically, our minds reach for links because links promise sense and sense promises safety. We are pattern makers by design, drawing lines between stars so the sky won't feel like chaos. Yet, sometimes the line is real. It points to a weak railing, a dusty box of replacement parts, a policy written in a hurry that stayed too long. And naming the link doesn't turn grief into math, it turns it into a map. A map we can use. So when a detail repeats, an invoice name, a stamped number, a song on two car radios at the same intersection on the same unlucky evening, notice it. Ask what small decision flowed through both stories, not to blame, but to learn. Because the eerie thing about linked tragedies isn't that they're impossible. It's that they're made of ordinary choices, crossing at ordinary times, until a thread pulls tight and we finally see it. See it, and we can change where the next thread goes. That's how the web stops looking cruel and starts looking like something we can reweave, one honest find at a time. If the universe has a favourite prank, it is tapping your shoulder a heartbeat after you jump. I fold the letter with the slow care of someone bandaging a wound. My name on the back like a verdict. The street is quiet, the air brittle with that early evening chill that makes sounds travel farther. I lift the red mailbox door, feel the tongue of cold metal against my fingers and let the envelope slide. A soft thunk, like a lid closing. There, decision made. My phone buzzes in my other hand. Wait, it is your name lighting the screen. A text bubbles open, carried by whatever invisible rivers decide when words arrive. Found it. The missing receipt. The proof I did not take it. I am so sorry. Can we talk before you do anything permanent? I blink so hard the letters blur. The mailbox door is already resting flat, unbothered by my new information. I lift it anyway, peering in like a child, looking for the moon in daylight. Empty. The collection should not be for another hour, but a little hand-lettered note says the route changed today. Parade, early pickup. Of course. I start to run. The mail truck is just a box turning the corner, tail of red lights winking. I chase it, ridiculous and breathless, waving my phone as if the driver can see my entire heart in that small lit square. The truck hits a string of green lights, like the city is laying down a ribbon just for it. I stop at the curb, bent over, laughing once in disbelief. The timing is comical. If it were a movie, you would roll your eyes. Another buzz. A photo. The receipt tucked into the lining of your coat. The one I accuse, the one you insisted you had checked. A voicemail follows. Your voice raw and stumbling, starting with my full name the way people do when the truth is heavy. You charged your phone at the cafe. Their outlet tempered your hope, stretching minutes. The text sat unsent in some limbo until the instant my envelope disappeared. It feels orchestrated, like all the clocks in our small city shook hands behind our backs. I call. You answer. We speak like people who are careful with matches in a dry field. We find the edges again. I apologize in the plainest words I have. You do too. We are clumsy and honest, and somehow still here. The letter, though, is in a bag with 1,000 other endings, riding toward a sorting centre with humming belts and calm workers who do not know they are handling a thing I would pay anything to undo. 2 days later, it arrives at your door. You send me a photo of it on your kitchen table. We open it together on a call, and the words spill like a version of us from a different timeline. It is a fossil of a moment when I chose wrong with conviction. We laugh, we cry, we keep it. Not as a threat, not as a wound, but as proof that sometimes the strangest coincidence is not that a message comes late. It is that anything arrives exactly when it must to show us who we are. And maybe that is the real joke. The messenger is never late. We are simply early, forever reaching out a second before the world reaches back. Here is something you don't plan for when you close your eyes. You wake up with the taste of salt on your tongue and a message from someone miles away asking, "Did you feel the tide too?" Maya and Theo live on opposite coasts. They talk sometimes, share jokes and big news, but most nights pass in their own quiet apartment hums. On this night, both of them fall asleep to different city sounds and open the same door in their heads. It is a green door with chipped paint set into a round white wall. Wind surges through a broken pane. Beyond the door, the floor is cold stone, and the air smells like wet rope and metal. They are in a lighthouse that neither of them has ever visited. The beam turns in slow, patient sweeps. Each sweep lands on a jar on a little table. The jar is full of sugar, and inside it is a brass key. The label on the jar reads April Salt, written in a careful hand. A red string is tied around the neck of the jar, and the string trails off the table like a little comet tail. A woman, out of view, says "not yet," as if the words float up from the stairs. Somewhere below, a bell rings 3 times. Not a harsh clang, but a soft, measured sound, like the sea saying a name. Maya reaches for the jar. Theo reaches for it too. The sugar inside glows a little. The lighthouse light turns again. They both notice the ladder. To the lamp is missing the 3rd rung. They both notice a tin compass with no north. When the wind gusts, they hear the same melody, a simple humming tune, just 4 notes rising and falling like a breath. They both wake just after what each would call the middle of the night, that thin hour when the street is quiet and the fridge hum sounds like a distant boat. Their hearts are racing. The taste of salt clings. Without thinking, both of them type the same first line. You will not believe this. Maya writes about the green door, the jar, the brass key. Theo sends his version first, and when Maya reads it, her skin prickles. He has the label right, the string, the bell, even the missing rung. She calls. He answers with a laugh that sounds startled. They talk over each other, trading details, discovering they both heard the word "not yet." They grab paper and sketch. The round room, the chipped paint, the little table with its 3 new scratches that look like claw marks. When they hold their drawings up, the scratches line up. They spend the next day trying to rationalize everything. Maybe some old story or photo slipped into both their minds. Maybe one of them mentioned a lighthouse on a call months ago and neither noticed. Maybe the weather did something to the brain. They search their messages. They find nothing. They call their mother and aunt. No one knows a lighthouse story. That night, when they speak again, they are not trying to solve it. They are feeling it. That odd wonder that arrives when the world lines up in a way that feels like a wink. For the rest of the week, the phrase "not yet" follows them like a quiet echo. When they pass a hardware store, they both glance at the keys. When they stir sugar into coffee, they pause. And whenever the wind moves just right, they both hear the same 4 notes and, without talking, wait to see if the bell will ring 3 times. The phone rang like it had been practicing my name all afternoon, and I answered without checking who it was. A woman breathed in, then said, "Is this Thomas?" I told her no, wrong number. She apologized quickly, the kind of sorry you throw over your shoulder when you're already hurrying away. But there was something in her voice, a tiny wobble, so I asked if she was okay. She laughed, a relieved, embarrassed sound. "I was trying to call my sister," she said. "I'm not great with phones when the storm gets loud." Then, almost to herself, she added, "I needed to ask about the box." I was ready to wish her good luck and hang up, but curiosity sat up. "What box?" She hesitated, then said, "Our mother's old recipe box. I think we left it behind. The house with the lilac fence and the blue door that sticks, on Weaver Street." I stared toward my own front door, its stubborn blue paint flaking like a dragon's scales. The lilac bushes just outside were tapping the window in the wind. I told her my address. She went quiet, then laughed again, but this time it broke into a sob. "That was my house," she said. "We moved when I was little. I was trying my sister's number. I must have mixed it up and got yours." The phrase "wrong number" felt suddenly too small for what was now on the line between us. I told her we'd moved in this spring, and that some mail still arrived with the name Rojas on it. She drew a breath so sharp it felt like a door opening. That was our mother. She always said, "Weaver Street keeps what it loves." I asked about the box. She told me about a low space in the attic, left of the window, where she and her sister hid notes and candy wrappers, and once a secret key. Her voice carried the map of it. I climbed the attic stairs while keeping her on speaker, the house creaking in agreement with her directions. Left of the tiny window, behind a loose plank, my fingers found a rusted tin, smudged with old flour. I set the tin on the kitchen table and opened it. The cards inside were written in a looping hand that made every ingredient sound like a promise. There was a letter on top, folded and soft from being read many times. It was addressed to Lena and Mari. I asked the woman for her name. "Mari," she said, "like a wish." I told her I had something that belonged to her. We planned to meet the next day, but the storm began to drum itself serious, and she whispered that she was about to drive across town to sit with a neighbour at the hospital. I unfolded the letter and read the first lines aloud to keep her company. The words were simple. "If the sky is making that long trough sound, do not rush. Put water on to boil. Let storms spend themselves while you brew tea. The house knows how to wait." Mari listened and then said, "I can wait a few minutes." She stayed on the line while the kettle warmed. Later, we would learn a tree fell on the exact corner she would have passed at that exact minute, as if the storm itself had flung down a reminder to be gentle. The next afternoon, she stood on my porch and the blue door stuck at the same place she remembered. She held the tin like a heart that had wandered back. We talked in the doorway about small things that felt suddenly large. The porch step that always grabs your heel, the patch of sun that lands at the same hour in the back room. I told her I'd been feeling untethered since moving. She told me her mother used to say that some mistakes are just doors with new names. We didn't become best friends or swap keys or promise forever. We just returned a box and a bit of time to each other. But that night, I made a soup from one of the cards, the kind for restless hearts. I ate it at the table while rain stitched the street into one long silver thread, and my phone sat silent, like it had finally said what it needed to say. I only slipped into the shop to escape the rain, and there I was, mid-laugh, trapped under glass. Years before, in a cramped apartment that smelled like coffee and fresh paint, I lost a single photograph I swore I would keep safe. It was the one my mother took on the last night the fair came through our town. The lights hung like constellations we could touch. Her scarf kept blowing up, and she kept swatting it down, and I was caught with my eyes half shut and both cheeks full of cotton candy. Along the bottom edge was a shallow crescent crease that made the whole thing look like it was smiling back at us. I tucked it into a tin with ticket stubs and a key that fit no door, a small archive of moments that made noise when you shook them. And then, during a move that happened too fast, the tin opened, the noise spilled, and the photograph was gone. I searched in ways that embarrassed me. I checked behind the outlet covers and under the refrigerator. I pressed my hand into the mysterious slit in the sofa lining and felt only lint and a coin, so worn the face was a rumour. I lifted every rug corner, emptied every box twice, called the movers, argued with the movers, apologised to the movers. Weeks passed. The fair left town again for good this time. My mother stopped asking. I stopped bringing it up. Life stacked new boxes on top of old. Years later, in a different city whose streets hadn't learned my name yet, a storm chased me beneath a striped awning and through a bell-chiming door. The shop was a collage of other people's stories, chipped mugs painted with daisies, lamps with shades that remembered smoke, a stack of frames leaning like tired soldiers. I wasn't looking for anything, but there was a frame at the bottom, a cheap wooden one, its glass rippled like water. I flipped it and found a torn backing paper held by brittle tape. The price tag said the kind of number written by hand when someone is guessing. I bought it because I like things that try. At home, with rain ticking on the window, I set the frame on the table and tugged the paper free. Behind the stock photo of a stranger's smile was another sheet, and then, tucked flat against the glass as if it had been sleeping there all along, was my photograph. The crescent crease was still a crescent. Along the edge, that faint smear of pink sugar I never wiped off because it felt like proof. On the back, my mother's careful pencil, "Hold still, Comet Kid." My hands shook. I forgot to breathe. The room tilted towards silence. I called the shop and asked where the frame came from. The owner said a church sale, a box dropped off with no story. The church was on a street I had never walked, in a neighbourhood I had never lived in a city that did not exist for me when I lost the photo. There was no way it could have travelled through all the private doors it would have needed to open, and yet it had not only crossed distance, it had arrived right to my hands on a day I was only trying to stay dry. I stopped trying to solve it. Maybe the world is a patient sorter. Maybe the things we lose learn our orbit and circle back when we've steadied enough to catch them. I slid the photograph into a new frame and set it where the morning light could find it, and when it did, my mother's scarf lifted again. The fair hummed and the crease smiled, as if the impossible had only been a delay. The coffee at the concourse tasted like burnt almonds the morning the pattern started. I was half awake, juggling a boarding pass and a bag of pretzels, when I looked up and noticed her. She was sliding her coat into the overhead bin above my row, the way someone moves when they've done this 100 times. We swapped the universal traveller nod, sat, and took off into cloud. A month later, on a different day and a different itinerary, I reached the gate, and there she was again, curled around a paperback, with a paperclip for a bookmark. When they announced a delay, she glanced up, recognized me, and grinned like we were co-workers from a dream. "You again," she said. "What are the odds?" I laughed. "Apparently better than I thought." We didn't exchange names. It felt funnier not to. The third time, the universe went for style points. Weather rerouted me through a city I never passed through, and as I jogged toward a last-minute connection, I saw the same jacket, the same paperback, the same easy posture at the charging station. I slowed, shaking my head. "Okay, this is getting weird." She looked up, then cracked. "If we end up in the same row again, I'm filing a report." We finally traded names, like a ceremony to make the moment official. Then the call to board stole us away. There's a reason coincidences feel like magic tricks. Our minds are hungry for patterns, and once we notice one, we keep watching for it. Surprise glues memories in place, so the strange becomes sticky, and sticky becomes meaningful. Psychologically, that's part of why a moment like this doesn't fade. It lights up, and then it keeps lighting up every time the pattern repeats. We started treating it like a story we were both helping write. If we crossed paths in the aisle, we'd trade small updates like postcards. "I'm on a work trip. I'm going home. I'm trying to like airport salads." Little human notes pinned to a repeating melody. And here's the quiet idea sitting underneath. Coincidences don't force meaning on us. We choose it. When we decide a moment matters, our attention pulls it into focus, and a thread appears where there was only lint before. Naming that choice turns randomness into a connection you can hold for a second, then pass back and forth with a smile. The fourth time, we finally sat side by side. Takeoff was smooth and the cabin lights went dim. We spoke in the soft, seat-belted way people do when the clouds are close. We compared our tiny flight rituals. She always takes the window. I always keep my shoes on. We both count to 3 before refreshing the flight map. At some point, she said, "Maybe the world is smaller than it pretends to be." I shrugged. "Maybe we're just better at noticing." By landing, our coincidence had become an inside joke with a gentle heartbeat. We said goodbye without a promise. That mattered. It meant the magic wasn't a plan. It was an invitation. That's what these odd overlaps really are. Little taps on the shoulder. Reminders that even in the loud machinery of life, there's room for a wink, for a brief chorus between strangers, for the feeling that the sky shuffled its deck and turned up the same 2 cards again. If it happens to you, let it be light, let it be warm, and let it be enough to change the colour of an ordinary day. And if it never happens again, that's fine too. The meaning you made once will keep its glow. The bulb above the bathroom mirror sputters like a trapped firefly, then steadies. Somewhere else, the same breath of night, another bulb does the same tiny stutter, like 2 hearts trying to remember a rhythm. They used to joke about this kind of thing. Mirror twins, they called themselves, though they were only sisters born a handful of minutes apart. Layla drew with her left hand, Noor with her right. One parted her hair to the left, the other to the right. In photographs, they stood shoulder to shoulder, and you could fold the picture down the middle and almost trick yourself into believing it was the same person twice. They traded cities after college, one to the coast for salt air and fog, the other inland, where summers draped themselves heavy across porches. They kept ritual without trying. They bought the same winter coat in different colours, chose apartments with the bathroom window facing east, so the first light found them in the mirror. They never said they believed in coincidence, but they liked the way it felt to catch life, repeating itself like a chorus. That night, a storm staggered toward both cities, late and restless. Layla put on tea, the way their grandmother taught them, for the pleasure of steam ghosting the glass. Noor set a towel on the floor to catch the drip from a cracked shower pipe she had promised to fix. Layla hummed a melody she could not place. Noor hummed the harmony without knowing why. The bulb flickered again. Layla reached up to tighten it. Noor did too. Different bathrooms, same gesture. The glass shelf below the mirror in each place was identical, bought on the same sale day months before, because they had sent each other the link with a laughing message about great minds. On Layla's shelf, a small ceramic dish with hairpins edged toward the drop as her wrist nudged it. On Noor's, a bottle of soap, slick from the humidity, began a slow slide. The dish went first, a clink, then a scatter. The bottle followed, a soft thud, then a wobble. Layla's barefoot heel met a pin, her weight shifting where the tile had never quite settled level. Noor's toes found the soap she had not seen fall. Each moved to catch herself and reached for the same anchor, the mirror frame. Each found only smooth, wet glass. After, there were details that made people speak in lower voices. Times written on coroner forms that fit within the same small window. Bruises reflected on opposite sides of the face, as if the same body had been turned around. The song that Auto played from a playlist started at the same verse where their voices once braided together on long car rides. On each phone, an unsent message drafted to the other. Nothing urgent. Just a question about a recipe they both used when it rained. Their grandmother had covered mirrors during storms, a superstition she never explained. The family laughed about it when they were children, pulling the sheet down to make faces at themselves, to watch their expressions land on two different mouths at the exact same time. At the apartment cleanouts, someone noticed the receipts tucked in the manuals for those glass shelves. Same date, same hour. Even the cashier's initials matched. No one said the word fate out loud. No one said anything at all when, back at the house where they grew up, a draft slipped through and the hallway mirror breathed on its own, a thin cloud that vanished before you could point at it. You could call it chance. You could chart it on a timeline and shrug. Or you could stand in front of a mirror, any mirror, and let the light flicker, and wonder whether some stories only know how to end by telling themselves twice. The bell had rung for the fourth time when a folded note slid under my door, like a bird that had learned to knock. "Please see me," it said in careful handwriting. "There has been a mistake with your name." We were 3 days into a silent retreat on a mountain where even the wind practiced restraint. No talking, no phones, just hand signals and the occasional emergency note. I thought I had broken silence by breathing too loud, but when I walked to the office, the facilitator pointed to the sign-in sheet, and then to me, then to the sheet again. There it was, written twice, each in a different hand, Jordan Lee Patel. And then, as if conjured, a person who looked absolutely nothing like me stepped out from behind the doorframe and lifted a hand in the same startled hello I would have used. Same full name, 3 words, each one matching like a key and its shadow. We stared at each other the way mirrors do, curious and a little afraid. Our mouths remembered the rule, so we smiled instead. The facilitator tapped the sheet, then gestured at 2 cots in the same small room on the layout map. The duplication had turned into a real-world overlap. We had been assigned 1 bed, 1 towel, 1 meditation cushion, and the same me. We solved it with pencils. On a scrap of paper I wrote, "I go by Jordan." He wrote same. I added middle name Lee. He wrote same, but spelled like the tree. That made me laugh silently. The kind of laugh that trembles your shoulders and makes your eyes look like they have just seen a magic trick. The days on that mountain became a duet of small echoes. When the kitchen crew placed a towel labelled with my name by the sink, we took turns using it without comment. When a volunteer set a cup with our name beside the kettle, we lifted it like 2 halves of a synchronized tea ceremony. The shirt I washed in the basin, he wore by accident. The book he borrowed from the tiny library found its way into my hands. I learned the choreography of not mine that only coincidence can teach. We did not speak until the last afternoon, when the vow of silence rolled off us like fog leaving a valley. I heard my name spoken from behind me, and turned to hear my name again. We said it together and laughed in relief at the sound of being 2. He was from a town I had passed through once without stopping. I was from a city he had always wanted to visit. We compared nothing and everything, and for a moment it felt like the world had chosen a name and pressed copy, then sent us walking toward the same remote hillside. Before leaving, we traded emails and, with a grin, clarified which Jordan would be which in the subject line. He drew a small leaf beside his. I drew a tiny wave beside mine. We promised to meet again in a place with more noise. On the bus back down the mountain, I pulled my identification card from my pocket and looked at the letters. They sat there like coordinates to a place I had just discovered. Maybe names are how the universe keeps track of us, and every now and then, to keep itself entertained, it lets 2 lines cross, just long enough to remind you that your story can be true in more than one voice. It tumbled out of a stranger's coat and hit the tile with a sound I already knew. Not loud, just a soft, bright ping that skipped straight through the noise of the store and landed in my chest. I bent down and there it was, the thin silver coin with the tiny hole near the top and the initials, the same looping letters my grandmother used to trace with her thumb. She called it the Traveller. She said it belonged to the family the way freckles belong to faces, moving unpredictably, but always returning to the same blood. When I was small, she'd bring it out on a ribbon and let the metal warm in our hands while she told the older stories. Her mother first found it on a station bench as a restless teenager, the day she almost stepped onto a train and left home for good. Decades later, it came back in an envelope with no note, scuffed and bright, postmarked from a city no one in our family had ever visited. Then it disappeared between moves, between years, between one kitchen drawer and the next. That was the way of it. It left. It returned. So there I was, grown and tired in a grocery line, holding the coin the stranger didn't notice losing. The initials were ours, the hole was where a ribbon had once looped. It wasn't proof of anything, just a glimmer of the old story. I slipped it into my pocket and felt foolishly relieved, like a child who has just found the edge of a map. After that, it started to show up in the kind of places you would never look for family. My sister called to say she'd found a coin stitched into the lining of a tiny blue cardigan at a thrift store, of all places. She only noticed because her fingertip caught on the hole and the fabric tugged. She laughed when she told me, but her voice had that shaking sweetness people get when they have news that changes the room. She was pregnant. She hung the coin by her bed on a piece of thread, and slept easy for the first time in weeks. When our father was in the hospital, a nurse pressed something into his palm and said, "This must be yours. It was in the parking lot by your car." The metal brightened against his skin like a wink of sun. He tucked it under his pillow and said he felt like he could breathe again without that little flutter of panic in his ribs. Maybe that was the medicine. Maybe it was the traveller doing its quiet, silly job. Years later, my son made a volcano for school, and I was kneading salt dough at the table when something hard gritted under my hand. I dug it out, and there it was, coated in flour, the hole, the initials. He said it looked like a pirate coin and asked to wear it on a string. For a week he did, and every person who noticed asked about it. He told every version of the family story at once, the way children do, all truth layered with invention. I have tried to explain it a dozen mean, sensible ways. Lost coins, travel. People pass small things along without thinking. Probability loves a good ghost. But the pattern is not about metal. It is about moments. The thing shows up when someone is turning a corner only they can feel. The train, the crib, the parking lot, the kitchen table. It arrives like a hand on the shoulder that says, "Yes, you belong to people you have not even met yet." The coin is missing again now. I have checked all the usual places. I do not feel worried. A week ago, I heard a soft ping down the hall, and my niece came in from the rain with her cheeks bright and said she had decided on a name. I did not ask what she had found. I have learned to wait for the sound. The morning was supposed to be pretend. Clipboards, fluorescent vests, a whiteboard with tidy arrows showing where imaginary patients would go. Someone even joked about the snacks. Only in a fake emergency do we get cinnamon rolls. Then the radio cracked with a real voice that no one scripted. There's a pile-up on the highway. Actual sirens. Actual smoke. For one disorienting beat, the room held two realities at once. A nurse looked up and said, "Is this still the exercise?" A charge nurse didn't hesitate. "No. Move. This is happening." The eerie part wasn't that a drill predicted a disaster. It's that the drill had quietly built a bridge to cross when reality arrived. The clipboard arrows turned into muscle memory. Rooms that were taped off as overflow became overflow. Names that were pretend 5 minutes ago became faces. And hands moved faster because they already knew where the gauze lived, where the gurneys clicked, who grabbed the crash cart, and who called upstairs. Psychologically, repetition is a stealth superpower. Under stress, our brains don't rise to the occasion so much as fall back to the level of what we've practiced. That's procedural memory, habits and sequences laid down so we can act without narrating every step out loud. And it matters because stress narrows our attention. When adrenaline surges, familiar steps give the mind a railing to hold. A drill is not theatre. It's rehearsed calm. If you've ever watched a flight crew run through a checklist with that steady cadence, you've seen the same idea. They're not being dramatic. They're building reliability. In that hospital, the same rhythm took over. You take triage. I'll prep beds. Call for extra hands. It almost felt like everyone had agreed on lines without reading the script, because they had earlier when it was safe to make mistakes with tape and sticky notes. It's easy to call this kind of timing spooky. It's more useful to call it a lesson. We don't practice because we expect disaster. We practice because life is generous with curveballs. Drills shrink the gap between chaos and clarity. The moment you've tried a thing when it costs nothing, you make it cheaper when it counts. This is true far beyond emergency rooms. You can run a tiny drill for your life in the smallest ways. You can walk your family through where to meet if a fire alarm wakes you at night. You can rehearse what you'll say to a friend when a conversation feels hard. so that when emotions spike, your words remember the path. You can set your bag by the door, double-check your meds, or do a mock run of a big presentation to a quiet room that won't judge you. None of that invites trouble. It invites steadiness. There's also a side effect that no one mentions. Practice lowers fear. When your body knows the next move, your mind has room to care for other people. The nurse who'd clipped on an observer badge at 9 was holding a stranger's hand by 10 and had enough presence to say, "You're here, you're safe, we've got you." That's what rehearsal gives back. Humanity under pressure. The coincidence will always make a good story, but the deeper truth is simpler. Pretending on purpose helps us be ready on purpose. And when pretend becomes real, the difference between panic and poise is often one quiet drill that felt unnecessary until it didn't. The sliding doors hiss, a shopping cart squeaks, and in that tiny pause before motion, two strangers breathe the exact same words into the air. "Guard the jellyfish." They both blink, startled, then laugh, because what are the odds that such a weird line would leave two different mouths at the same instant? It feels like the world just winked, like there's a tiny zipper running up reality, and for a second, it zipped closed cleanly. The brain loves that click. We do not expect it, which is partly why it explodes into laughter or awe. And yes, sometimes it is plain chance, but it is also something else, how people quietly align without knowing. Psychologically, our minds are always scanning for rhythm, topic, tone, and timing. And when those line up, language can snap into sync like magnets finding north. Picture this. You and a friend standing by a crosswalk, eyes on the blinking hand. You've been riffing on sea creatures for a few minutes for no good reason. Octopus socks, shark keychains, the cafe's fish tank. The light flips, and right as a cyclist rings their bell, both of you say, "Release the Kraken," in the same low, mock-dramatic voice. Immediate silence. Then a burst of laughter that says more than any explanation could. There was no plan. There was just a shared tune humming underneath, and the words caught the beat. Or think about co-workers after a long afternoon meeting. The room's stale, your notes are a tangle, and the whiteboard still holds a faint ghost of last month's plan. As the door swings open, the hallway rush feels like a river. Without looking at each other, you and the person beside you say, "We need a clean slate." Same phrase, same second. You both grin. The pressure releases. You feel like teammates again. The uncanny part is not just the same words landing at once. It is the feeling tucked inside it. For a heartbeat, you are seen without effort. It shrinks the gap between me and you. You recognize you were already sharing the mental weather, the private map of everything that scene suggested. That is why it feels impossible yet undeniably true in your bones. If you chase it, the moment wriggles away. But if you let it stand, it becomes a small souvenir of connection. The trick is not to prove fate or rewrite the laws of math. It is to notice the alignment you stumbled into and name what matters about it. Maybe it says your attention is tuned to the same station. Maybe it says the room has a louder mood than anyone admitted. Maybe it is simply a gift of humour when everything else felt heavy. So when it happens, the strange phrase in unison, the ridiculous slogan spoken at the same time, pause. Smile like the universe cracked a joke and let you be in on it. Lock it in as a shared scene you can point to later. Remember when we said that? That memory becomes quick shorthand for we get each other. And on a crowded day in a noisy world, that kind of shorthand can feel like a little miracle. Not because the words were magic, but because, for one bright second, you were perfectly in step. Blame the pigeon if you like, or the taxi that slid a nose over the crosswalk. A tiny tangle of traffic stole less than a minute from me and handed back an entire life. I was late before I even pulled out of the driveway. Keys under the mail, coffee lid not on right, a sock with a mind of its own. I told myself I could make up the time if the lights rolled my way. The morning had that thin winter brightness that makes everything feel sharp and possible. The heater hissed. The radio murmured about nothing important. I slipped onto the main road and settled into the rhythm of brake, gas, sigh. Then it happened. The car ahead stopped at a green. Not hard, not dramatic, just stopped. A delivery van had nosed halfway into the lane, hazard lights blinking like a shrug. The driver was carrying a stack of boxes that looked heavier than his arms. People behind me started to lay on their horns, not out of danger, but out of habit. I felt heat rise in my chest. One more delay. One more nobody's fault pause, stealing seconds I could not spare. I did the petty things. I tapped the wheel. I checked the empty passenger seat as if someone might be there to agree with me. I muttered words that would fog a mirror. 30 breaths later, the van scooted forward, the line crept, and the light turned yellow, then red. I missed the cycle. More honks, more impatience, another tiny surrender. By the time I reached the ridge, before the big intersection, the sky had brightened to a clean silver. Kids tugged at backpacks near the bus stop. A crossing guard's neon vest flashed as she laughed with a little boy who had lost a glove. I remember being angry at this softness, as if cheer could slow me further. I rolled downhill. The light at the bottom blinked green. For a second I thought, finally. Then every brake light ahead of me bloomed at once, a wave of red. I eased to a stop. Silence, the kind that swallows the inside of a car. Up ahead, smoke unfurled like a grey ribbon. A truck had chewed through the intersection, a tangle of metal and glass where the left turn lane used to be. An airbag hung like a white flag from a car whose driver's side was folded into itself. People rushed. Someone shouted for a first aid kit. Someone else screamed a name that did not answer. I stared at the exact patch of road where I always glide and go. The left turn lane, mine. The time on the radio host's voice, just after 8. The gap between my tyres and that wreck felt thinner than a thought. I felt it like a cold hand on the back of my neck. 30 breaths at a green light. That van, that stack of boxes, the horn section of the impatient choir behind me. A silly delay that had pulled me out of the path I was certain I deserved to be on. Later, much later, when the tow trucks had dragged the day back into order and my hands had stopped shaking, I tried to imagine the version of me who made it through the earlier green. I could not. All I could see was the crossing guard's bright vest, the boy's single glove, the van driver's tired face. Threads. Invisible until they hold. Ever since when the world pauses me, at a red light, behind a bus, for a pigeon with too much courage, I let the breath leave my body and take the hurry with it. Not because delay is noble, but because it is sometimes a door you do not know you are walking through, a door that opens to the rest of your life.